All right, guys, welcome to the final Victory Never Sleeps of 2023. Um, don't want to start off on a downer, but I do want to take the time to remember those we've lost over this last year. So, Allison Malilo, Mitch Lovelace, my mom, Daniel Franklin, Michael Vaughn, Alan Wittenberg, and Camden Musser. Folk remember, and we miss you guys. Hail the fallen. With that, I hope everybody is having a great Yule so far. This year we lucked out. We got two Victory Never Sleeps episodes during Yule, so that's exciting. Trying to think of any business here at the top of the show. As always, we're being broadcast on live on YouTube, Entropy, VK, Twitter, Odyssey, and Rumble, and what's the other one? Oh, and Twitch. So you guys can check us out there. Anybody who is on one of those platforms, I know that we're interacting with the YouTube very often, but you're welcome to ask live questions on any of those platforms, and we would be very glad to answer those and do that. Anybody who wants to participate in the super chat thing, get your question up front, or just throw any donations at us, we appreciate those. They always go to good causes. But if you'd like to do that, if you're interested, the description on how to do those things is in the description of this video. So we appreciate that. We're always very thankful. And that being said, I haven't gotten a lot of attention on the entropy lately, and we had some questions on that. But when we started the show today, we started off with a $10 donation from Ludwig Carl over on Entropy. Says, no question, just wishing both of you, your families, and the AFA a happy Yule. Well, I appreciate that, Ludwig Carl. I hope that you are having a very happy Yule yourself. So I lied to you guys. Last time we had Svan on, I talked about, next week I may have something exciting for you, or the week off.
Yes.
Week off. So still got it done during Yule. And by got it done, I mean Svan took time out of Yule with his family to go and make it happen and finalize some stuff. So without further ado, we have a little video here that we would like to show you about something a project we've been working on for a while now. So Nick, if you would roll that footage for us, please.
There are two people more than anything else who are responsible for the amazing things that we have in our lives today. Steve and Sheila McNallen built this. They built it with blood, sweat, and tears. They built it with years of thankless work, laying foundations and setting in motion a dream that in many ways was far off to achieving. But the work, the love, the devotion, the pioneering spirit to see what could be and to take that initiative to go out, to put in the work, to stand alone, to build it, is something we will always be so very, very grateful for. Our founder, Stephen McNallen, is responsible through his personal relationship with the All-Father Odin for bringing Asatru back into our world. He is the foundation that modern Asatru is built upon. And his wife Sheila to build our AFA, to build our community, to build our family. She has put in all of herself and continues to this very day, and will for all foreseeable future. She cares about this so deeply and so much that so much of Asatru writ large is a result of Steve's inspiration and his dedication. So much of our AFA family as a group, as a church, has been built on the heart of Sheila McNallen and the love that she has for our gods and our folk, and to see this happen. And we could never possibly do enough to honor them, but we're going to try anyways. And I've always wanted to see statues erected of these amazing people, and what better time than when we found our home, the home of victory, Sigerheim. So we wanted to put that into place and make that happen. And I'm proud to present these statues to Steve and Sheila McNallen as a Yule gift from all of us who have been so very inspired by the work they've done, and who are so very, very appreciative from the bottom of our hearts.
Good folk, I have the great honor and privilege to present to you today a gift to the McNallens this Yule at Sigerheim in honor of them, in dedication by decree of Asatru Godi Matt Flavel.
There was a very special picture that was taken of the McNallens in a field, and it was taken around the time of the foundation of the Asatru Folk Assembly. And that picture has always been very inspirational to me, and I think in one frame it captured the very essence of what we do.
We present to you these statues in dedication as a gift for Yule, to you both, for so much. Without you two, none of us would be here. None of these great and momentous moments of the Hoffs and the attainment of Sigerheim, none of this would have happened without you. So from the bottom of my heart, and all the folk gathered here that have helped to make this happen, and from Asatru Godi Matt Flavel and his genius of getting this done and having it made tangible from an idea to reality for you, hail, Kaleda Legior, happy Yule, to you and to all the folk. Let us rejoice in our victories. And these are just one of many that we have gained and many that are to come. So, to you, to all the folk, have a happy Yule, and hail the McNallens.
Steve reaching up towards the gods, arms outstretched in the Algiz pose, facing north, with his mouth open, chanting into existence this that we know as Asatru, and with his devoted wife Sheila to his side, holding the horn, making things sacred, making things special, looking up with devotion and dedication. And that's what's brought us here today, and that's what we sought to try to recapture in bronze. But I suppose all that can be said is thank you, and you are deeply and forever appreciated by your folk. Hail the McNallens.
Hail the McNallens.
Hail the McNallens. Hail the McNallens.
Hail Steve and Sheila McNallen.
Hail the McNallens.
Hail the McNallens. Thank you for all that you have done for us.
Hail Steve and Sheila McNallen.
Hail the McNallens.
Hail the McNallens! Hail the McNallens! Thank you for everything you've done.
Hail Steve and Sheila McNallen.
Hail the McNallens. Hail the McNallens!
I say so often in Selma, hail the McNallens.
Hail the gods.
Hail the gods!
So special thanks to folk builder Lydia Phelps for putting that video together. As always, she did an outstanding job. And Svan, thank you for taking time out of Yule with your family to go down there and make that happen. I think it was really special that it happened the time that it did. I think it's a perfect way to close out the year, close out Yule, and to start what will be, we are just now about to begin our 30th year of the Asatru Folk Assembly. So yeah, I think that turned out really nice. It was really important for us to, for that to be one of the first things that we did at Sigerheim, so that we build what's to become the home of the AFA, the home of Victory, Sigerheim, to literally build it around the McNallens. So yeah, there you go. I'm amazed that that's been able to stay secret, because I think we've been working on it since May. May, I think. So glad that was able to work out well. And I talked to the McNallens right before this broadcast, and I know it's much appreciated. Thank you for everybody who helped out with this, and very happy with how that turned out.
Yeah, it was good. I didn't know if I was going to be starting the podcast with this much feels.
Getting all the feels up front.
Right out the gate.
I'm less sloppy with the feels on beer 1 than on beer 5. So,
I know, yeah.
So
get it out now, because later on
we'll be messy later on. So good. So
that's
with
a phenomenal
that
video.
It was really well done. She did an awesome job with that, and I knew she would. She's magic at that. So we're happy to talk about anything folks would like. We are still celebrating Yule. We've still got, a few days left on that. We're only a little over halfway Yule. It seems like we've been in Yule for a while, but we're just a little bit over halfway point on it. Happy to talk about that kind of stuff. Happy to talk about anything you guys would like. And the theme of tonight's program was around, Svan and I have been going through our calendar of holy days to kind of explain why we have the holy days that we have, how we celebrate those, what they're all about. We're continuing in that series today with February's celebration, which is Charming of the Plow. So we will talk about that for a little bit, but keep in mind, conversation can go wherever you want it to tonight. That's just kind of the topic we're going to present here. So Svan, if you could, if there were a someone tuning in that's never heard of it before, has no idea, could you lay them the foundations and tell them about the Asatru celebration of the charming of the plow?
Yeah, absolutely. Charming the Plow is one of our sacred holy tides that really starts to turn towards spring. So this would be, in essence, the last celebration before we turn our tidings towards the other half of the year, or the sun tiding of the year, and that's our working towards midsummer, and then from there it will fall again. So our calendar works in two poles. We have the midsummer pole and the midwinter pole, to which we're in right now. Charming of the Plow is an interesting holy tide. I think in the beginning, when Asatru was starting to reemerge and organize itself, it didn't just want to pull from the Norse. Even though there was a heavy influence of Nordic, holy tides, clearly with Thorblot, it was something that was known by all of us in Asatru that you have this European faith. It's not just a Nordic faith, and it's in all of these Germanic or Teutonic Aryan groups, whether we're talking about the Germans or the Frisians or the Anglo-Saxons or the Danes, or even the Eastern Prussian, Polish, and Central, and even Northern Italy and far west into France, the Franks. Our religion has been everywhere, and so they wanted to pull from a lot of these other traditions, and you see that first really showing up in Charming of the Plow. Now, Charming of the Plow is a relatively modern term for the bloat that has inspired this holy tide, and the bloat comes from England, actually, and using the word acre, meaning land or field or plot, it's called Akerbot, was actually what it was called. It was Aecerbot, Akerbot. You can look it up. It was from a manuscript in which there was only a very small prayer left over. And again, this is one of those things where we don't have that immediate passing off. We've had to research and look and find things because there are tattered pieces of our past. Perhaps the Norse did hold something similar, but it wasn't written down, or something perhaps survived in, the Alps or in Germany or what have you. But here in America, as Asatru was forming, they looked at this actual written piece of work and realized, oh, this is a great time to do this holy tide at the beginning of the year. And they kind of angled it for the majority of America. Now, when you're talking about charming the plow and breaking the ground, say in Minnesota in February, it's still pretty rough. But down here in the South, absolutely. But the biggest point of the ceremony is it's threefold. It's one, it's the priming of the masculine light, the power of Frey, getting ready to make contact with the earth. And this goes through with Lord Freyr preparing his retinue of the light elves, and everything's getting kind of ready to go into this moment of spring. Once the gates of Dellings Hall open up and Ostra brings all of this in, the light, all of the power that comes into the frozen earth to get melted, and then there is an absolute impregnation of life that's brought about. And this is kind of the preparedness of it. And there's also a gifting to the earth, a sense of laying our own personal seeds, whatever they might be. They might be perhaps summer tiding inclinations or proclamations. They might be goals in which we wish to see grow into fruition. A lot of times there are bread or biscuits or things like that that are placed in the ground inside a furrow that's cut with a plow. Now, the original Akerbot did not speak of a plow. It actually spoke of just cutting or spading into the earth and placing biscuits and giving a prayer to the earth for the fruition of the fields. But that has morphed over time because we are a living religion. We're not reenacting. And so over time, I have seen this holiday take a lot of different forms. Again, like I said, on the metaphysical, we're preparing for the natural events of the light coming down and placing in the invigorating seed of life into the earth. And then we're also seeing the fruition of the fields, but we're also seeing a preparation for the summertide as far as general craft. So a lot of times people will bring things from their work in order to be blessed. And this is more of a living part of it, of the ceremonies. Somehow, in some way, it started, and the Gothar were obliged to bless. People would show up sometimes with perhaps an implement or a symbol of their work and ask the Gothar to bless these items so that they could have good luck and good fruition for the next coming summer tiding. And, whether that's money or the expansion of clientele or just advancement in our work or just refocusing in our industriousness. The Charming of the Plow has a lot of different dynamics to it that I think is really beautiful, even though it seems to be one of the more, I would say, timing of the year makes it a harder holiday. Like right after Yule. Yule is a big celebration. We have the Foreblot, which is a chance for us to all get together and just have fun. And then Charming of the Plow is like the first holiday where we start, okay, we got to start focusing on what's to come. The rest period of the deep tiding of the winter is over, and we need to start focusing on what we're going to start doing for this summer so we can attain, so we can gain, and so we can just conquer whatever plans we have coming for the next year. And that's Charming of the Plow in a nutshell.
There you go. There you have it. So here's the thing. We can go into a lot of detail on a lot of specific things, but fundamentally, I think there's a tendency to overthink. I think there's a tendency to try to justify or try to backfill with stuff when it's kind of not necessary. Thor bloat, we're having a fun celebration in the middle of winter, and we're going to honor Thor. Charming of the Plow, we are starting the work year, as it were. We've got our you will notice this series into a lot of different pieces as part of a process, as part of a cycle. It's, again, because of the world that our ancestors bequeathed to us. We are stalled out on my end. Is everybody else hearing me? Okay, now we're back. Looks like it's having a little bit of a stream's having a little bit of struggles here, but I hope that we're following what I'm saying. You guys can hear it. What I was going to say is our year's broken up into the process that is displayed very often through the agricultural cycle. And that it certainly is obviously applicable if you are involved in agriculture, but it has a deeper meaning that I think transcends that to any of the plans or the good work that we put ourselves towards. What's exhibited by Charming of the Plow is that time of preparation. We've done our celebration. We've done our, waiting and getting through the slog of the roughest time of the winter. And now we are at Charming the Plow. We are preparing the tools of our industry, is what I like to say when we do the tool blessing. Be that a plow to break the soil or, a tool for whatever work that you were engaged in. I've done blessings for laptops, for people who do IT work. I've blessed I've blessed hands and gloves for people who are professional fighters. I've blessed, tools of carpentry and of, construction. I've blessed tools for artists. But whatever we're doing, we're preparing to assert our will into the world. And one of the key images of the charming of the plow is cutting that first furrow, is the idea of our iron will breaking the hard earth, breaking through resistance, and literally implanting our will into the world by will to power, by force of will and of determination to see things happen, breaking through that soil and penetrating the earth or penetrating the world around us with the seeds of what we wish to grow and develop and achieve during this year. And that's kind of the bigger theme around Charming of the Plow. And that's why the plow is still such a powerful piece of imagery for this celebration. I can't think of something, better or more illustrative of that, the idea of breaking through and inserting our will, inserting the seeds of our intentions into an unyielding world. But as Svan mentioned, in Minnesota, it may seem agriculturally odd to charm the plow in February. Growing up in Alaska, that was certainly the case. It seemed a little bit odd when we still had several feet of snow, but the principle is sound. We're starting that year of productivity, and we'll see that all the way through, and you'll be able to follow it through as Svan and I go through these different ceremonies that we celebrate at our holy days. One thing I did see over in the side that I wanted to address, somebody was commenting on the lack of putting out the previews for upcoming episodes and wondering if we're out of ideas. Not the case. So much as I mentioned,
no, not at all.
Well, so much as I mentioned last time or 2 weeks ago, last time we had Svan on as a guest, the exact the statues, everything worked out. Weird worked its way in a beautiful, beautiful way. Everything happened exactly as it was supposed to. We did not know that at the time, and there were a number of different little moving parts and things to see when that would happen. And I knew Svan would be down there for a portion of it. We had to work out when he was available, how the transit was going to work, how easy or difficult the installation process was going to be. So a lot of things were up in the air. That's why we kept it kind of loose. But we do have the next several planned up now that we've gotten to the other side of that. That was taking a lot of the focus, and we'll get those up. I like to have that planned up for about 4 episodes in advance. So we'll get those up and set up tomorrow. Nick's been chomping at the bit for them too. It's on me, but I'll have those set up for you guys tomorrow. Is there any more thoughts on Charming of the Plow that you want to put out there for folks? Pause 1 second. So during all of this, we got a $20 donation from the Phelps family. You guys are awesome. You guys have helped us so much, up to and including that donation and Lydia's amazing video that she made for us. But yeah, $20 from the Phelps family. Hail the McNallens and hail the AFA. And hail the Phelps.
Hail.
All right. So that said, Svan, do you have any more notes you want to impart about Charming of the Plow?
Yes, I misspoke. There is mention of a plow, but there's not mention of the usage of a plow to dig the furrow. There's actually a couple of things. One is this is very much like loaf mass, and I wanted to bring that up because of the connection. A lot of our holy tides are seen as kind of like bridges to other parts of the year. And one thing worth noting is that Charming of the Plow is absolutely a bridge to Freyfaxy or loaf mass. We use the word Freyfaxy and or the title. But the reason why I brought up loaf mass is there's mention of the fact that they used to cut sod, like mats or pullings of the fields, and they would bless them with a specific anointment of honey and of sacred herbs. And later on, it became still a thing that even after Christianity, they would bring these plots to the church to be blessed. But it's also, it's kind of interesting to note that, because it's the same with loaf mass. With loaf mass or Freyfaxi, the celebration of the last bits of the fields being kind of effigied into a John barleycorn. There's the separation of that which is going to be used for alcohol and that which is going to be used for bread, and the consumption of bread and alcohol at the end as a celebration of all the hard work that was done by the producers of the society. There was this grand kind of festival, and so it was kind of understood that the charming of the plow, or acrebot as they had called it in the times before, was a time to get ready for a arcing season or tiding that ultimately culminated to this. And we have these happen multiply throughout the year. So our holy tides kind of link to other holy tides, and ultimately midsummer to midwinter or to Yule. And it's worth noting that there's also another thing that was said. They talked about the Angeli in Tacitus giving great amounts of sacrifice to the earth as the mother. And so one thing I wanted to note was that in the prayer, and this is so rare because it was written down after Christianization, was that the chant was marked as that the practitioners or the people that were working the field would stand facing the east, and they would turn 3 times clockwise around the field, oftentimes holding up that plot of earth or the cakes. And so there's another kind of reference to the reasoning of why when we do hammer hallowings, we face the directions. This is kind of a sense of surrounding and always kind of going clockwise in the route of the sun. And then from there, they would place these into the ground, and they would say, Ersa, 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 Eorthen Mother, the earthen mother. And it was, again, a chanting hail towards asking the earth to receive the seeds of both light, of will, of power to manifest into the ever-receiving, ever-waiting earth that was finally starting to thaw out. And we see this, even though this is particularly Anglo in its focus, we see this again in the stories of Lord Frey and his bride, Gerður. And Gerður being the frozen earth. There's great mentions of her arm being white like ice and being cold and rigid, and that the story itself is allegoric for the light and the warmth slowly eroding away the rejection of the cold earth, which was such an important thing for our ancestors, especially the agrarian members of our society. Generally, we had a tripartite style society, and for the producers and those who were greatly dedicated to Lord Frey or to Lord Freya or to Nerthus or to Njordr, there was a desperation of getting things started, because the sooner you got started, the more you could produce. The more you could produce, the less likelihood people were to starve or to die or not have the nutritional value they needed in order to defend the nation and keep everything going.
And that's why very typically the god that we honor during this time with bloat is Lord Freyr. And the reason for that certainly harkens to the bit of lore that Svan just shared with you. But in a very basic biological way, I think those things come into play. And it's one of those, it's unfortunate because the world and the time that we live in, there's a certain amount of awkwardness in describing the very obvious biological components of that. But, one of the key identifiers and key aspects of Lord Freyr is the erect phallus and the manly potency that he possesses, the idea of quite literally penetrating something that is fertile and implanting seed within it to grow and to have new life and new generation is very much at the heart of this and many of our celebrations. And I think that, you know, without being vulgar, that the biology of that is really important to, I don't know, it's an important tool to visualize that helps make this matter, because so many of these principles that are laid down apply across a great many, you know, planes of existing and planes of doing. There's something that is just a Western magical truth, as above, so below. These things kind of transcend, and there's layers to them. So there's a biological layer. If you're a herdsman, if you're a family producing your children, we can literally see this is how we are successful passing through the generations. There's this when it comes to agriculture. There's also this when it comes to any plan coming to fruition, any business venture. There's that stage where you're planning and then you are putting your will out there. Svan and I have spoken about this, but one of the key components of magical happening, and I've said this about a lot of things. Again, it's something that has multiple layers. The greatest distance is from your couch to the door. The greatest distance for an idea or a thought, what takes it out of the realm of an idea, is when you speak it into existence and then it's into the world. You've put it out there, as it were. That saying has a, you know, very direct meaning. Once you've said it, then you can't take it back. You've put your intention out into the world. So much of the idea of breaking that soil, of breaking the ice, as it were, is putting that intention out into the world. You're done planning, you're done thinking about it. Now you're making your intentions known on what you want to accomplish. You're planting that seed that you're hoping will grow into fruit that we can harvest and celebrate, you know, when the year turns to the appropriate time. And that's the deeper meaning of what we want to embody and celebrate at Charming of the Plow. With that, we get to some of y'all's questions. We got kind of a clunky question getting to me scheme here. We're working on different stuff, but it does mean I got to look over at my phone. So that's why there's a little bit of a pause and me looking off screen for a sec. Be More Heathen asks, question for you guys. Work is interfering with really enjoying this Yule to its fullest. Just wanted to know you guys' opinion as far as enjoying it as much as possible, with work making it not hectic, taking away from the Yule peace and enjoyment. Svan, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've been doing the 12 nights Yule for many years now. Tonight is Odin's night, and I still work throughout Yule. I definitely take off whatever time is allotted for the Hoff. And then the night of, which is day 0 and day 1 on the Iron Mark, I take off from work. And then after that, I pretty much hold bloat and celebrate at night. So go to work, do as I normally do, and then arrive home and hold a small bloat with the family. And that could be about the amount of it. And I'm just talking bare bones, especially if we're doing a lot of traveling, if there's a lot of family coming in, everything, it depends on the situation. Sometimes no family's coming in and we're not really doing a lot. So we might start a little early and add some more things to it as we go. Maybe go to the range on Uller's night and then come home and clean our weapons and kind of go over certain things, just things like that. But generally I hold them at night, and I've never really conflicted. I think my clients have asked, hey, are you going to be open, or are you shutting down for 12 nights or 12 days? And I'll tell them, no, I'm going to be open and I'm going to go through, and then I'll do everything I need to when I get home. Unless you're working like the 3 to 9 shift I think would be a little rough, especially if you got kids and things like that. But, at the end of the day, quite literally, you can fit a little bit of time in, even if it's something as simple as giving a small gift, whether it could be something you made or brewed, or, just sitting down and having a moment to pray to the gods and give thanks for that time of the year. Outside of that, it really just depends on you, how big you want to make it. But I do not stop my work throughout the entirety of Yule.
One of the special things about Yule in particular is that there's 12 days of it. There's a big window that it's so if you're working a lot during it, chances are you have some time off during those 12 days. Getting to do that, maybe you have to pile a lot of how you observe Yule onto one of those days that you have off or that you have with your family. If your hours are such that you can enjoy doing those in the evenings, I know that's something a lot of people do. If you can take off, certainly 12 days is not necessary to take off work, and I think can be very burdensome to people. But taking the time to attend your Yule celebration at your Hof is really important. But that's one of the things you find ways to get in where you can. And one of the other things is to, keep stuff festive. And it's different if you have a family or if you're single or what your situation is at work, how much you're able to express your religion at work. Maybe a place where it's very inviting of it, and you celebrate in the break room with stuff, and you bring in some cookies and you get, part of what's going on. But finding little ways to just be conscious of it and be happy and remind yourself to celebrate. It's one of the things these days it depends. And I mentioned this earlier, Yule is an amazing time of year, but for a lot of people who are struggling, it also shines a light on their depression or things they might be struggling with. So something to keep in mind is reminding yourself to celebrate, as silly as that may sound. But being there and having stuff that's a constant reminder of, hey, it's Yule. We should be happy and celebrate this. Because sometimes I think we forget that. And having 12 days of being reminded, hey, this is something to celebrate and to be excited about it's something. Even if you're by yourself celebrating, take time to spend a few minutes at your altar each night, saying something positive, celebrating. If you feel alone, celebrate with the gods and your ancestors. But don't wallow in it. Celebrate with your friends. If you're struggling, don't go drown your sorrows. If you're in a mood to celebrate, go out to the bar, go to the restaurant, go do something, be around people. But reminding yourself to make the effort to celebrate pays off, and nobody ever regrets that after they do it. It's hard to get yourself motivated sometimes if you're wore out, if you're working hard, if you're depressed, if you're whatever you are and you're feeling mopey. No, go through the motions, put on something nice, go out, celebrate, and you will be thankful that you did. Next up, how were the pig heads? So this year I was excited. I cooked up my two pig heads. If I had it all do over again, probably one was probably plenty. It was really fun to do. It was an exciting process. It was cool to see that my daughter did not get traumatized by it. I was a little bit worried about that. I think she was very curious and very aware of the piggy heads. They were really fatty, so I couldn't eat a whole lot of them. I saved a lot of them, a lot of cheeks and whatnot to cook with our black-eyed peas and collard greens. We're going to cook up on New Year's. The skin is awesome. The skin by itself is awesome. It shocked me at how fast the sheer amount of pork fat became very disgusting. So that was interesting and fun as well. But yeah, cooking them up was fun. It was exciting. However we did it, cooked them great. And the skin shocked me with just how crispy and awesome it was. So that was really cool, and it was a fun experience to do. And Svan does not know how his were because he does his on 12th night, correct?
Yes, I do mine on the 12th night. I mean, again, I think just like what you were talking about, we do our faith in the best ways that we can based on when people are coming over and what is available. I don't think that there's kind of like some sort of ritual book that we follow. It's more of a culture that we have, and that culture can be dynamic based off of what's going on in our lives. I'm actually going to get the pig's head tomorrow, and I did say one was all you needed. You didn't need to do two, but I mean, again, if this is your first time doing it, sometimes having two you can help if you have a travesty in cooking. But yeah, there is a lot of fat involved in the face area, if you will. So, I have a general sense of eating a lot of the skin like a chitterling on the outside. The ears I usually give to my pup, and I skin the jowls down and eat the jowls and the tongue. And then everything else I use for cooking as far as soups and stews and adding that really good healthy fat. But you don't get a chance to eat much of it. It's a lot. And you can fry it, and cook it in strips and fry it. But or if you're using it like when you want to sweat some onions or shallots, you can use slivers of the fat to render and really create a good base, and then you could pull that fat out. And if you're making a marinara sauce or something of that nature, it really does add a lot of silkiness to it. But I'm buying mine tomorrow.
Excellent. Yeah, we had a couple of people pull out at the last minute, but I still two would have been too much. But I didn't know what size pigs they were going to give me. Pigs come in different sizes. It was one price per pig head, so I think we did all right that way. But yeah.
Did you do any now normally people would say oaths, but I know oaths for us are very, very important. So an oath on a pig's head outside of a ritual situation is not always the best, but we kind of do like New Year's resolutions, if you will. Did you do any of those?
No, and I think that's an awesome thing to do over it, but we did not. I was busy hustling, trying to make that. I also, somebody mentioned on here a number of weeks ago when we did our Yule episode about glog. So I made some of that as opposed to just regular mulled wine. I tried that. It's ingredient intensive. I think I'll probably just stick with regular mulled wine because I don't think the difference is that much, but it was interesting. It had the cardamom was an interesting flavor in there. I think that was good. I don't mind, doing some more of that. I had, but you added raisins and almonds and all kind of stuff to it that I don't know if it really added much to it. Snuck a lot of alcohol into a relatively, yeah, it was, but it was surprising. The recipe called for, an entire bottle of bourbon and an entire bottle of rum. Didn't seem like it was that much. It really didn't. We drank most all of it with the people that were here, and nobody was excessively celebratory. So yeah, I think it worked out. We also, made a ham and whatever because, one of my family traditions is on Christmas Eve growing up, we would eat ham sandwiches. So kind of decided to do that this year too, and it was fun. It's just I don't know where that came from, but it's something that we used to do at my grandparents' house growing up. Our next question, from Katie, speaking of charming, how can one get tickets to join the festivities? Why is it being held at the Bestest Hof? For those of you who might not know, Charming of the Plow is the feature event for Njord's Hof. So I will be going down there for that. Anybody who is able to, that's in White Springs, Florida. And it's going to be awesome. February is, it's the best time to visit Florida. It's really nice. It's just outside of the little bit of cold that they actually get, but it's still not hot and gross like in the summer. It's a really good time to go visit that Hof. And I look forward to seeing everybody who can make it there. Nick, do we have a link up yet for people who want to purchase tickets and attend that event? It seems we do. Thank you, Nick. Anybody who is listening to us on Spotify later down the road and can't see the link or anything that way, check it out at runestone.org. You can purchase tickets there, and that Charming of the Plow, we will celebrate Charming of the Plow at every one of our Hofs, but the national event for the Charming of the Plow is the featured celebration at Njord's Hof. And that's if you can only attend Njord's Hof once in the course of the year, that is the one you want to shoot for. As for why is it there, I really do think it's the weather situation, as I recall being part of those conversations. It was fitting it in where we didn't have the previous Hofs. Those of you that don't know, Njord's Hof is our 4th Hof. So that means there are 3 other Hofs in front of them that have already chosen what their event is. So we had to figure out what was left over to choose from. And then from that, what was going to be the best opportunity for that Hof. At each of our Hofs, we celebrate all of our holy days. It's just a matter of picking which one's going to be the feature event for each of the Hofs. We got next from Gothi Trent East. All's here, you Gothi, and Witan Svan. Can you explain why we give bloat to Njord Frey specifically? Yeah, I think that I already have. Svan, did you have anything else to add on why we celebrate Lord Freyr at Charming of the Plow?
Specifically at Charming of the Plow, I thought it was just in general. I was like, okay.
No, I mean, I think we did it in general. I think it was specific to Charming of the Plow.
I think it's there's a unique thing that people have a misconception about our faith, or perhaps just polytheistic framework in general. I think that a lot of people get confused with the ideas like, so-and-so is the god of rain, and so-and-so is the god of sowing, and so-and-so is the god of Lunchables. And it just keeps going into absurdity as to like these finite things. But we view our gods as extremely godlike, powerful beings. I mean, we call them gods for a reason. We use that word, aus, as well, with the express purpose of understanding that we see that our gods interact with the middle world in many different ways. And so their will can manifest much like a palette. When Ymir and the slaying of Ymir and the shaping of the world takes place, this means that the gods have dominion over the material. And this isn't just, you might find some people who just strictly place this upon Lord Odin. And that's not correct. That's not the right way to do that. And we see that our ancestors give many accounts to the idea of sometimes Thor has dominion over the rains and the wind of the middle world. And sometimes Lord Njordr has dominion over the wind and the breezes and the rain and the fruitfulness and things. And so does Lord Frey. And again, this is a reiteration of the fact that our gods, we use mythic story to explain this kind of interaction, and we could possibly frame it in different ways if we wanted to do like a metaphysical kind of conceptualization of it. The biggest thing is we know that the gods gather at the well of earth, which is in heaven, and they interact with the world below them, which again, the gods being in the upper is very, very important. And there they interact with this, with the well, and the well is the exemplification of order that descends down into the material. So rain and good weather and light doesn't only have to be associated strictly with Suna. There is light with Balder. There's light with Freyr. And it's not that they're just kind of categorized into these little troughs of certain things. And, you know, it's done with Odin. Odin is seen as the Lord of battle and the reaper of souls of the chosen, but he's also seen as the giver of gifts and the bountiful, giver of prosperity. So our gods have a great amount of power that manifest as they interact through the well, or sometimes quite literally. And there are lots of cases, and that's a whole nother subject about avatars and are there examples of these things. But when we talk about Lord Frey, we ask him to give his dominion, his power in the beneficialness of light and of warmth and the preparing of the fruitful season of all of the planting. I often give gift to Lord Frey for my flocks. I have egg-laying chickens, and their health is important. I've had a couple of years in the past where, thankfully, I've only had maybe one or two to suffer from some sort of illness, and had to kind of take care of that. But for the general sense, my livestock, for lack of a better word, I'm not proclaiming that I'm some sort of great farmer, has been, blessed and fruitful, and we have lots of eggs and lots of giving, animals and things like that. So really, whenever we're praying to any Aus or Ausinir, any god or goddess in our faith, we are asking for them to implement their dominion into our lives. Whether it's guiding us with wisdom or opening up avenues of perhaps we were ignorant of, or that we could see. The blessings of the gods come in many different forms, and we don't typecast the gods into singularities. So when we think of Lord Frey and the light that's coming down to melt the earth, we're asking for his dominion of fruitfulness and the preparing. In the stories, he prepares the light elves. He lives amongst the light elves, which is the skein of light between heaven and the middle world. And so he's always kind of ready and there for the time to descend and bring that warmth and bring that light. And so he implements that dominion. Some would argue perhaps physically coming into the world. And that kind of, again, plays in the story language of our bloats, where at Freyfaxi, we see Lord Frey in a story. We're not saying he's doing this. But we allegorically talk about Frey now saying goodbye to his beloved and returning back to his kingdom without his horse, while he, returns slowly back to the land of the Light Elves with his retinue of Alvar. And that what's left is, of course, the horse, and the horse is a symbol of that last little bit of his dominion. But this applies, I think, to all the gods. And I think it's a great question, but specifically to Charming of the Plow, that's why. But to all the gods and goddesses, that's ultimately why the mechanics of what we're doing. The gods are not slated into typecasted little things. I think that was a Christian habit of trying to typecast the divinities of their ancestors. Oh, they prayed to this god for rain. They prayed to this god for war. But we clearly see that the gods kind of expand through all things, and that really takes place through the well of earth. and how they gathered a council around that well to disseminate the power into the middle world that's below them.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to consistently reemphasize. I think that it's very natural for all of us when we initially come home to Asatru to see things that way. Odin equals wisdom and magic. Thor equals might and the storm. Freyr equals fecundity of herds and of growing things. Njord equals, water stuff. I think that we all have a tendency to do that because we like to compartmentalize. We like to make things very simple, but it's much beyond that. Each of our gods is a god. Each of our gods is beneficial for you to pray to if you're on a boat, if you're on a plane, if you're going to battle, if you're trying to, deliver of your herd, if you're trying to deliver your child. Each of our gods is a god and is godlike in their power and their scope. Now we have things that are more typically thought of as, I guess, specialties of the gods, ways that our ancestors have typically built relationships and their understanding of our gods. But each of our gods has godlike powers, and it's appropriate to call on them based on your need, but also based on your relationship with them. I think that the ingathering of the folk is something that founder McNallen has talked about in the early days of our faith. And reintegrating our faith into our people that are spread across the globe is different than when we encounter it in ancient sources. Different places had more powerful connections with particular gods or particular goddesses that they would call upon for their needs based on their relationship more than just based on the natural function that we associate with one of those gods, if that makes sense. And the most often seen is, the god associated with kingship in most places was Odin, but in Sweden the god associated with kingship was Lord Freyr, and you would see the royal line descended from him. It reflects that different relationship these tribes of our ancestors developed with particular gods for particular reasons. And in different locations, the natural world functionality of these gods would take a different form based on geography. So just keep that in mind. There's a lot of right answers to what God to pray to for certain things. And our gods have a much deeper dimensionality than Njord equals water. Our gods are much more than that. Let me see what we've got next in line. From the Wolf Throne, when partaking in the gift cycle, do you think it's mandatory to ask for something, or is it acceptable to give an offering and give thanks without asking for anything in return? Also, is it mandatory to speak out loud when you pray, or can the gods hear you if you pray inside your head? So first, no, it's not. It's never required for you to ask of something. And I think that it is of fundamental importance to understanding our faith based upon relationships. And I appreciate the question, and I think it's a good question, and it's a question that people have and have asked. So I'm not attacking the question at all, but is it okay to speak to your grandparents and just say thank you without asking for stuff? Of course it is. Is it okay to speak to anybody that you love and care about and just thank them without asking them for stuff? Yes, because our primary relationship to our gods is as, exalted kin, as the arch kin of our tribe. But it's in relationships. The gods look favorably upon us. We are their children. We're their followers. They are our gods. It's a loving relationship. It's not a transactional business relationship like certain desert tribes would engage in with their deities, or anyone else for that matter. It's not transactional, and it's not legalistic, though there are legal elements to our faith and there are transactional elements to our faith. It's primarily about relationship building and interacting through relationship. In that sense, it's always okay to say thank you. That said, and another way of thinking of this, and I think that Whitcliffe Erickson has pointed this out probably most prominently amongst our Gothar. The gift cycle has always, the gods started it. So our existing, having the luck, the skill, quite literally having the breath of life, the goodly hue, the wit, having all of those things and the elements of our soul, we start out owing the gods in terms of the gift cycle. So they paid that forward. They've blessed us tremendously. And if all we do for the rest of time is show appreciation for that, that's a reasonable thing to do. Now, yes, we do often ask for things, and we often try to give and share in return, but it's not about that. And just like the gifting cycle between your family, you don't give your friends and family stuff in order to force them to give you stuff. That's wrongheaded, and that's not noble in how you deal with people. That takes away the point of generosity. You give because you find people or things worthy to give to. And yes, as part of that, it's noble of them to also give you things. But there's a healthy gift giving that's done in families. Then there's a transactional gifting that's done at the store. The store gifts you a loaf of bread and you gift them $5. It's not really the gift cycle at that point. It's just economics. And that's not what our relationship with our gods is. So I beat it to death, but no, you can absolutely always just give thanks. And that's one of the reasons that in the AFA, we celebrate Thanksgiving as a religious celebration. It is what we do. We celebrate it. People in the past get grumpy, but it's not that kind of a holiday. I think that anyone giving thanks to their gods for the blessings in their lives is always a good and appropriate thing to do, and something that we should all do more often. As to the second part, well, okay, I want to remember the second part of your question, but Svan, as far as the gift cycle and is it okay to just say thank you, or do we have to ask for stuff? Do you have anything that you'd like to add on that?
No, I think you really touched on that really well. The only thing I would say is I've often called that mindset is like the horns on the helmet. There's this old thought that kind of correlates that are perhaps if you're thinking about the Nordic ancestors specifically, and there was a lot of rain and muddy faces and shoulder pelts and great amounts of dreariness, and the idea was, I will not speak to my gods unless they give me something in return. And it kind of, this Conan-esque dichotomy has been kind of romanticized. It is a romanticized wave, and just like many other waves that we have had in relation, including horns on helmets and stuff, you can find good and bad in some of that. But the idea is that our ancestors have been witnessed, and things were written down of them showing thankfulness for seasons that have passed, but they also show, like Charming of the Plow, seasons to come, and that there is nothing being received by the folk, but instead they're asking for the blessing of the gods, perhaps once again, or they're on the cusp of something. And so I would say that a lot of times that it becomes so gray that it's really irrelevant. The idea of giving to the gods, I think, is right. It is good. It reflects greatly about your soul. If you see the gods as kind of schmarmy barbarian cromlings that will give you a broadsword if you give them, then that kind of reflects about the way you see divinity and the way you see things. But we see our gods as powerful and beautiful, as great and as mighty and encompassing. And so that really does take a dynamic that is not, perhaps I would say, is so cliche as the horns on the helmet. So yeah, give unto the gods with thanks and happiness, and also the fulfilling the duty of the troth that you now carry that your ancestors once carried. And so there's a goodness in that first part. Don't always think you can't ask, and don't always think that you have to receive something in order to give thanks to the gods.
Well, and also be self-aware and don't be arrogant. They're gods and you're a people. And I mean, so I do that on here sometimes, and it's not to be silly. Dumbing things down to its most basic components sometimes paints things with the broadest contrast to help you see it. Just as I've talked about the relationship between king and retainer, a king's gifts are much bigger than you can afford with, your portion of your harvest. A king can gift you horses and gilded mail and great stuff, and you can be like, cool, I'll be there in the shield wall and I'll do my part. You giving proportionally to your position matters. It's not an equal exchange. Equality's a lie. If you are trying to exchange with the gods and the gods bless you with the breath of life, how many bottles of meat is that worth? And just running out that economy, the gods really don't, from the folk as a whole, for all of us to give them worship, sure. But as far as your individual relationship with them, is your portion of food that you're offering, or you're, pouring out some meat, is that really how much breath of life does that buy you? And when looked at it that way, it almost seems silly to contemplate it in that terms, because it is. It's like you giving gifts to your children and your small children giving you something that's got some crayon on a piece of paper that they tell you looks like you and the dog, and maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but you can't tell the difference. The thought that went into it is beautiful, and it builds that relationship, and it's special, but it doesn't equate to something you went and spend, money. You can't nickel and dime that, nor should you. That's not the point. The point is the exchange. The point is, I love you. I'm giving you something from my heart. thank you, you appreciate me and are giving me something of a blessing. Thank you. And that's what it's got to be about. The other piece, and again, I really appreciate the questions, because I think a lot of the time folks on here ask questions that many people have but are self-conscious and don't want to ask, or don't want to be judged for, their questions seeming silly or whatever their thought is. I'm glad that these questions are getting asked. So, do you have to pray out loud, or can the gods hear you if you pray silently? As so many things with our gods, I think the mechanism is above our reality. And I think that the best we can do, which is, obvious and not wrong at all, is try to equate it to the things that we do know. And I've said this, and I think this applies when we do ritual too. Some people, when you're doing ritual, they think that the gods are hard of hearing. They think that our gods, because they're very old or whatever the case, you need to scream at the top of your lungs every hail that you make. Others of us find that really obnoxious sometimes, as do people's neighbors, depending on your circumstance. I'm not even being silly. I think it's in the spirit of the question. The point is the intention, and I don't think it is an issue of the gods hearing us or not. Trying to math that out to where they are to hear in whatever location we find ourselves in the earth, and like what decibel and where do you need to face and how does your voice need to resonate. That's not the point. You communicate to our gods through prayer. I think that if you are participating, okay, so, and these are a couple of notes that I think come with this. If you are participating as a group, it is impolite for you to have prayer silently if it is a shared experience. And some people do this meaningfully. They'll go to Sumble and they'll have like, my heart, you know what I'm saying, hail whatever. Or, I don't mean to be flip, hail Freyr. That's impolite because the rest of us are toasting in assent, and we need to know what you're saying so that we can put our intention behind what you're saying and endorse it. So if you're sharing something that way, then certainly it needs to be audible so those who are participating with you can choose to be part of it or not, can choose to put their energy into it. If you're leading a ritual and you're speaking on behalf of others, then yeah, you need to speak out loud so we're open-handed, so we're on the table, so that people know what you're saying, so that when you are representing them before our gods, they trust what you're saying and they can put their focus, their might behind it. But there's, at my altar, I think I usually pray audibly, but there's many times that I've prayed silently. Usually it's audible if it's a bigger conversation. And I say conversation, that maybe puts more to it, but if I have more to say, but if it's very often a simple giving of thanks is something that I do silently when I give prayer for thanks and for appreciation. But mouthing the words, speaking them audibly, going through the nonverbal communication of it, projects that out into the world and to the gods. I don't think you can just think it. You need to make your thought into an action. As long as that's accomplished, the voice doesn't matter. And that's the other thing I was going to say. I know a lot of people, and in very early stages of Asatru, of modern Asatru, people, there's a big emphasis on ancient languages, or what language that you pray in, or your ancestors for that matter. When you pray to your ancestors, if you pray to one of your really distant, well, I say in my case, one of my very distant ancestors, my ancestors have lived in North America, in what has become the United States for hundreds of years, almost all of them. But let's say you have ancestors from the old country in Europe, somewhere where English isn't the language. Can your ancestor from the 1400s in Germany understand what you're saying in modern English? Yeah, because I think it's beyond that. And I think that the means of communication is beyond that. I don't think it's not about you having the right volume and them cupping their ear and them trying to interpret your, no. I think that we communicate in spirit. We communicate in a way that transcends that. But the only way that we know to conceive of communication is through written, verbal, through gesturing and nonverbal. But I don't think it works quite like that. And I don't think that's something we ought to be worried about. I think it's all about that intention. But what I do think is the important little point there, you can't just think it. You have to go through the point of at least saying it in your head, at least putting it together as something that you are projecting instead of something that's, we have fleeting thoughts all the time that don't count. It counts when you speak it into existence. And that's why vocalizing it has a value. But moving your mouth to the words without adding volume, the volume or the breath that you put into it isn't the point. The point is taking it from the realm of, man, I think I should say thank you, to is a big deal. For those of you listening tomorrow on Spotify, I just silently made my face make the thank you face without actually making the noise. It's probably confusing. Svan, what say you on that?
You hit everything there. Towards the end was one of the things that I was going to emphasize on, and then you started to hit it, and I was like, dang it. I was hoping that it would kind of get glossed over, but it is absolutely correct when you're talking about that manifestation of deed versus thought. I think that I believe that the gods, and I don't mean to overspeak, but perhaps in the way that I view things, is that I believe that the gods are in the upper realm, the place in which time and reality and law and order descend from them in this kind of great weaving of weird or earth, that which is coming into being from that well. And as it descends down, the gods see us in the skein of all things, just like the Nornir do. And that story talks about that. And in that skeining, in that ability to see all things and kind of integrate into all things, it's not about an omnipotence per se, as it is an ability to kind of read all of that which is woven together is now skeined flat. So instead of like trying to read the individual thread of a rope, it's now like a fabric. And I think that has a great mythological truth, in the sense that the way the gods kind of see us is perhaps in the skein of all things. And so our thoughts, our intentions, some of the things that we battle with, so good thoughts and bad thoughts and what have you, the gods do have the ability to, but we are but one thread in the great skein of things. And so oftentimes I think we talk about the gods witnessing us as groups, as a tribe, as a people, as a nation. And that has a tendency, I think, to have more of a visual value in the skein of things, if you will. So I do believe that the gods can understand and see or feel your thoughts, but there is something unique about this. When we talk about the gods interacting with the middle world, they do it through the well, this kind of threshold of the liquid, of the well itself in heaven. And we are in essence enacting that when we do bloat, when we speak over the horn or at sumbel, when we are talking over that liquid, we are placing our prayers into reality, finalizing it. Because again, the flippant thoughts that you might have might not always come to fruition, but once it's said, once it is out. And so I don't know if that's necessary for the gods, because I would never speak that way, but the idea is that, is it necessary for us? Is it a cultural manifestation of the way that we do things? Perhaps, we can internalize prayer, but those prayers eventually formulate themselves into a physical spoken word, or a whisper, or what have you, over a horn, or over gifts, or as smoke is being held aloft. I would always recommend at some point that your intention is at least broached perhaps with a simple word or multiple words or a vocalized prayer. But it's not to diminionize the idea that praying internally towards the gods somehow loses that. It's just that final step, as Asatru Herul said, the manifestation of deed is so important. The gods are filled with all of their power and intentions and will, but it's when they place themselves through the skein of the well and into the middle world that things begin to happen. It's kind of very much the same way for us. We're filled with all this potential and ideas and beliefs and feelings, but it becomes a manifest when we start to physically enact those thoughts. And that's a great filter for us to get rid of thoughts that are perhaps useless, or that we're still working through, and ideas. And eventually we hone ourselves in the correct path and align ourselves with the weird or with the earth of the gods. So I don't think it's necessary, but it is, because of our culture and because of the way we kind of view things in acting. But that's a great question. Seems so simple. But man, Wolf Throne, that was a good one.
Random side note. At Sigerheim, one of the cool things is the acoustics. So I'm always concerned because we've got neighbors. We're in the middle, and we've got a big spread of land, but there's houses on either side, and we're in a holler down there. So the ridge right across the road, if you feel the need to yell to the gods, they hear you at Sigerheim, as do all your neighbors and their animals and everybody else. It's got a really cool echo and cool resonance. But it just came to mind because it was one of those, hey, we're pretty late tonight when we're doing some. Well, maybe you don't need to scream at the top of your lungs. That's. Go ahead.
Another thought. When you were speaking about speaking of prayer around in a group, one thing that's worth noting is that you'll find a lot of people, there's two ways in which we give kind of thankfulness to the gods. Is sometimes we speak about the gods to our folk, how they have helped us, enriched us, or something of that nature. Another is that we do speak directly in prayer, often sometimes out loud to the gods during a ceremony, a bloat or a sumbel. And it's worth noting, too, that it's kind of, I would say, that you should try both. I find out that there's some people that strictly speak to the gods at this moment. This is like a shining moment, all of the will of us, of the folk gathering together in this auspicious time. It's a time to send faith and all of that to the gods. So I would say that it's worth considering perhaps during bloat that you speak to the gods and not to the folk, but during sumbel, speaking of praise to the gods, about the gods to your folk, is I think more of a dynamic understanding of those two kind of interactions. Because I do see a lot of people during bloat where they'll start to hold the horn and then they'll start talking to the folk, and it's like, we're the gods. The gods are here now. Like, let's do focus upward. And I find that sometimes people just end up kind of talking to their folk about it, and that's not bad. It's just that I think there is a different intention between the two ceremonies, and they're separate for a reason. A bloat is not a sumbel, and a sumbel is not a bloat. So
there you have it. Next question is for you, Svan, from Gothi Bodhi. Witan Svan, can you speak on Lord Freyr in relation to his father? Our most glorious lord of the sea, Njord. What does the lore say about their relationship to each other?
Oh, well, I think the biggest thing is that it's reemphasized over and over again that Njord is the price, or the hostage, if you will, of the end of the war between the gods. When cosmic order and natural law come into alignment, there is this kind of bountifulness coming from the Vanir or the Vana, as they give unto the gods of the sky and the upper world, and they are of the earth and of the water. And that's very telling, I think. It is about peace. It is about prosperity. And it always states that Lord Frey and Freya are begot by Njord. And there's a lot of stipulation. I think Snorri did not have a lot of lore in pertaining, so he kind of glosses and or slightly places in filling in order to kind of lyrically make the poems sound correct, but without divulging information, because there's no ignorance to the situation if there is no perhaps wrongness in it. But it's reemphasized over and over and over again. In the Heimskringla, this is where, again, Snorri Sturluson wrote this about the kings of Sweden, and he wrote about the gods euhemerized as humans completely. And in this, he talks about how Lord Njord is the king of the Swedes, and then he dies, and Lord Frey, or Frodi, as they're called, the fruitful one is the word that he uses, takes over and has the same power of implementing over the rain and the light and the breeze, like the good weather. So when we see this over and over and over again, that there's this relation during Yule, it is specifically said that both Njord and Frey are hailed over a horn at Sumbul, along with Lord Odin. But those two particularly together, again, because of the emphasis of not just plant and animal bounty, but bounty in general, monetary, fehu wealth, the idea of the power of that wealth coming about, whether it's the bounty of what you physically do or what you can attain through your will. And so there is always a consistent placement of peace and prosperity. And I would often call that to be both. Like Njord is peace and Lord Frey is prosperity. I do that just to simplify things, but at the Hof in Florida, Njordshof, there is specifically a picture of Lord Njord reaching over a cauldron to the Asa in a sense of peace. And the idea, again, is the cauldron being the receptacle of Kvasir, the first storyteller, if you will. The relationship between them, though, it again is not hugely emphasized after that. It's simply said that they are begot and they share much of the same dominion over powers in the middle, in the world that we live in. Outside of that, I'm trying to think of something particularly unique. There was one thing that I was thinking about, but I kind of have to look for it because it's in relation to Egil Skallagrimson and his belief, or it's in a poem. I wanted to bring that up. I saw that here, but I can't find it now. But yes, there is a ton of lore worth noting. It's also noted that Lord Frey in the in the prophecy of the Volva in the Volaspau, she speaks of the death of Lord Frey in the clash with Surtur, but that Lord Njord descends back to the land of the Vanir with his daughter, and they recede back. Again, this I don't know if this is story worth and perhaps adding in for lyric or for lyrical consistency in the poem. And I've thought about this a lot, but I don't know honestly what that relation may have. But the three that always seem to be coinciding together is that it is Njordur, Lord Frey, and Lady or Freya, Lord Frey, Lord Ing, or Frey Ing, and Lady, the Lady Freya, are kind of always in coalescence together. And they're often referred to as the most beloved of the Ouse, the most glorious or coveted. And there's a lot of understanding that I think after the alignment between the natural order or natural law and cosmic order, there's an understanding that the Vanir are not separate. They're not. There's no like the Asatru, I think was like a thing in the 90s that was kind of laughable. I guess in an attempt to try to get away from the patriarchy of the Aesir, or what have you. But the idea is that they are one and they are united, and it's referred to quite often. I would have to go in a little bit more to try to see intrinsically their connections to each other outside of, again, in the Gylfaginning, it's always mentioned that Lord Njord begot Lord Frey and Freya, and that they are given in exchange in that unification. And again, it's worth noting Lord Frey, one of his symbols is a boat, which I always found really interesting to think about. The gift that was given to him at the same time that Mjolnir is given to Thor is the boat Skith Blavnir. And it is, again, an emphasis of the boat. And Njord is referred to as Lord of the Chariots, Lord of the Wagons, I think is what it is translated to. And so at Njordsoft, you'll see I made a slight nod to that with a childlike effigy of Frey standing on a wain or a wagon, if you will. Again, making a slight Easter egg nod to the usage of the wain in relation to prayer with with Njord, with Frey, with Freya, and with Nerthus. So,
all right, this one is for the both of us. Matt and Svan, why do you think drinking and feasting culture is, and always has been, so prevalent in Western cultures and not so much in other cultures? Because we're awesome.
Yeah, it's a flex.
You know what? I really believe that it is, though. One of the, this may seem meandering, but there's a theme here. So there's Eastern religiosity generally in an ethnic sense, or at least in an ethnic interpretation, and there's Abrahamic Middle Eastern approach to religion, and I think that those things are important to keep in mind while we compare those with Native European religion. One of the things that has always been very appealing about Asatru, as opposed to Eastern religions and Abrahamic faiths, is I think what Steve McNallen once called the life is good principle. Life is good. We aren't our focus in existence is living well, is living heroically, is building a reputation for ourselves in this life. It's not about storing up treasures in heaven as it is for Abrahamic faiths. It's not about liberating ourselves from the cycle of karma, from the suffering that Eastern faiths place such a heavy emphasis on. Celebration, enjoyment, pleasure, feasting isn't bad in our faith, and it never has been. Indulging in the joys and pleasures of physical existence are good. Life is good. The world is good. We don't have this sense that life is suffering or that the world is sinful and, the dominion of Satan. No, we believe very much that we're living in the here and now. There's more later, and we'll take that when it comes. But right here, right now, one of the biggest themes in Christianity is that you are saved. First, that you are saved, that life is inherently sin and bad, and that you need saving from it. And secondly, that you receive that saving or that salvation through faith and not through works, that none should boast. Well, in Asatru, perhaps you're not saved by works, but you are exalted by works and not by faith. It's not what you believe, it's what you do, because we are our deeds. Building reputation and doing well and winning and being a winner are such a fundamental theme to our faith, and always have been. Whereas suffering, blessed are the meek, blessed are the long-suffering, basically blessed are the losers. That's not what we celebrate, and that's not what our folk have ever celebrated. And that's one of the things that defines Aryan people is, as you mentioned, the feasting and the drinking culture, the celebration. Some of the times we find our biggest points of celebration are when times are tough, are when times are lean, are when we're, eating off of the scarce stores that we have for the winter. But we're like, you know what? We're going to have a good time while we're here. We're going to celebrate. We're going to rejoice. We're going to raise a horn. And, we're going to laugh in the face of adversity. Exemplified, so poetically by Ragnar's death song. We're going to the very ends of our existence, through the roughest times, to celebrate and to have a heart of joy and to embrace life. And I think that is a really important fundamental. What say you, Svan?
Yeah, I was just laughing that we were kind of both going into that realm of the flex. I think that's one of the things that's truly unique between the West and the East of thought, is that in the West, the feast culture, which is prevalent, I would say, like beyond the Orient, when we're talking about, like, say, Polynesia, they have it as well in a way, because I think it's a hardship. For them, it's the ocean. I think for us, it's the weather. It's the cold. There's so much to it in which we take upon us these hard times, and then from the bounty that and our works, we celebrate. And so when you find a culture that has that balance, is where it's truly a reflex. But if we're talking about our ancestors, they're not considering, perhaps people outside of the outer guard. On the inner guard, it's also a combination of things. It's an ability to show your earned might, if you will. And it's a chance for you to spread that goodwill down to perhaps people that don't have enough to feast. And so inviting those folks to your place, and I'm not saying that's necessarily now, and I don't think that's really a thing now, but I would definitely say in the elder times, the idea is if you were in Iceland and you worked, on a just fishing, and then you get invited to a bloat and that bloat has lamb, this might be one of the only times you get a chance to eat lamb simply because of where you're at in your life or what you do, or you perhaps, you sell in order to gain things. But this is a chance for that wealth to be shared throughout the strata of all of the culture as well. So it's not just a flex. It's also a sharing of wealth and kind of establishing that network of relationships throughout the strata.
The two go together, though. If you're hosting a feast, you're flexing about how successful and how great you are, but your method of flex is through generosity. Your method, and this is a commonality amongst our folk, your flex as a great lord or a great king is your ability to give lavishly to your retainers and to entertain lavishly and to provide abundantly for those under your charge. So like your flex about how great you are is how well you can take care of the people who depend on you. And I mean, I think that's one of the themes that I've seen over in the side, and we'll get to when we talk about time, but time not being linear, being cyclical. That's two-dimensional. So much of what we do is cyclical, but by doing it right and doing it well, it's not just a linear circle, it's a spiral upward, or if we do it poorly, a spiral downward. But we gain momentum and we gain abundance through giving in that way. If we share abundance with those who are our folk that are of lesser means, that are, dependent upon us, that sharing keeps on giving and keeps on spiraling. It's also one of the themes, and one of the profound meanings of Fehu is it's not just wealth, but it's the circulation of that wealth. The antithesis of that is the dragon that sits upon its treasure hoard greedily and reptilian and obsessed lest one piece of its gold goes missing. It lashes out and it just sits in a cave and is grumpy for hundreds of years. That's juxtaposed to the king that gives out, a team of horses bedecked in gold and, armor and as much gold as you can carry. And you lay out your gifts upon your retainers. That circulation of wealth is what keeps everything vital and happy and refreshed. It's what keeps the tree, the world tree, Yggdrasil, vibrant and green. Hoarding your resources is what makes everything dry up, and it creates scarcity, and it creates, gold isn't valuable for gold's sake. It's valuable for your ability to buy with it, or to live with it, or to do cool stuff with it, or to benefit other people with it, or to benefit yourself with it. But just to sit on it and look how shiny it is, you miss the value that's inherent to it. And that's fundamental to our folk and to our faith. Don't be stingy.
Right.
That said, and fittingly, Sarah gave us $10. Thank you, Sarah. We appreciate it. When you are married before the gods and folk, then decide to divorce, is that considered oath breaking? It depends. One thing, and I want Svan to speak on this too, but oaths are based on, typically they're based on a reciprocal arrangement to where both parties have obligations of what they're contributing in that oath. And if unilaterally you're trying to withdraw from that oath, it's very different than if the other party in the oath isn't contributing for a significant amount of time that which they've promised to contribute. The oath is based upon the maintenance of both ends of that being met. And it all depends on the particulars of the oath that you make. But typically, for example, in a marriage oath, there's implied things that are in play there, and implied over the course of time. It's not like the first time the balance shifts and becomes uneven and the oath's no more good. But the concept is a husband providing certain things for his wife and a wife providing certain things for her husband, and that to be a mutually beneficial, healthy relationship. If that becomes completely one-sided for long periods of time, the oath has been violated long before a divorce happens. The divorce is a legal and official acknowledgement of the dissolution of the oath. But in practice, the oath has been broken long before, unfortunately. And that I don't throw that out there as license because, again, we all go through ups and downs. And I think that's always been the case with our folk. There are times, a relationship is never, ever, ever, ever 50-50. Equality doesn't exist. It is always some unfair balance of one party giving more of something than the other party. Ideally, that ebbs and flows over the course of life and how we go through things. And there's times where the husband is down on his luck and hard, and maybe the wife is providing more or giving more. And there's times where the wife is not in a good season of her life, and the husband is doing more for the family and doing more for his wife. And that's natural, and that's part of that. But there's a difference between that and completely shutting that off from your partner. And I think that, I'll just go back, like I said, the breaking of the oath is when intentionally or knowingly and without changing it, one party decides to stop doing that which they oath to do. That creates the break in the agreement. The divorce is a last step in officially finalizing and recognizing the severing of the oath. But the oath begins to break when one party, intentionally chooses to stop providing that which they promised to provide and continues that for a time. But the details matter tremendously. What are your thoughts on that, Svan?
Well, I mean, what you said has kind of been covered. I don't know if you're getting an echo. I'm sorry. I'm getting a little bit of a echo. Okay. I think it's gone there. I think one of the biggest things that you hit on was about the grayness of when exactly the oath was starting to erode. And the breaking part, I think, is worth noting that a lot of our folk get in the idea that an oath is something that is made and can never be renegotiated based on the evolution of a situation. And I think that is a fatalistic view, that oathing is about clarity of those things and then renegotiation, perhaps changing or dissolving of an oath. But it should be done publicly. It should be done before an adjudicator. I think this is also very much culturally a part of our ancestors meeting together and dissolving these things. It's mentioned quite often in the Althing in Iceland, reasons for divorce. My favorite one is remember reading about that women could divorce their husbands in Iceland because if they were wearing like effeminate clothing.
The
or,
deep V. The deep
yeah,
V.
the deep V. Or that they did not have enough money to make brew, like to make beer or ale or mead. And again, these are just snapshots of the cultural time. And I think it's important to note, but we are of a different time and we are of a different culture and a different society, but it has still a lot of the applicableness of it that transcends that, which is that there are reasons in which perhaps the oath between a man and a woman, or between anyone really, as far as perhaps if you make an oath of loyalty or something to a kinsman, and then those things change, and then you have to renegotiate that oath, or perhaps based on other oaths that you've held. I think this was part of our culture, and we have a tendency to romanticize it again, putting horns on the helmet again. A big thing to understand, though, is that it's not okay to just dissolve an oath or break from an oath without stating your reasons why, without being upfront about it. I mean, if you pack up your stuff in the middle of the night and slink out the back window, you're breaking an oath. It's not good. It's cowardly. It's terrible. But if you go forth and you actually have the gumption to stand in front of, perhaps an adjudicator, and to state your reasons with your, your significant other or the other holder of the oath, and openly discuss or speak of the reasonings behind things, whether or not the opinion of it all, of who did what and why and how, the true important thing is that now it is being openly brought to a close. And it's not being broken. You're not slinking away. You're not grabbing all your toys because you got a skinned knee and you're going home and not hanging out with your friend anymore. And you just kind of huff off. That to me is the saddest part of one of those kind of situations, because instead of it's not even cowardice, it's foolishness. You just think that you can walk away from things that you oathed yourself into. And that's really not good. Instead, you should have the bravery, the merit, and the self-worth to go through the process of ending an oath with an adjudicator oftentimes, because sometimes both parties are not, if they were left to their own devices, would not allow it to end. And that's what why we honor Lord Forseti in his dominion, is that he has given us the power and the wherewithal to understand the way oaths work and the way our society works. We're not savage. We're not, just completely uncivilized in the way that we do things. And so that process of, again, bringing oaths to rest, to leaving or settling an oath in order to possibly renegotiate or to dissolve and walk away from. And sometimes, you could take an oath, but the oath you're taking to, say, that person, and I'm speaking now more of a strata of like perhaps up and down, to a nation, to a king, to a president, or whatever. Sometimes there is a fulfillment of your duties are not being met, and so you can be let go. And oftentimes, I think it's done publicly, not often to humiliate you, but to allow you to speak your piece and bring it to rest and say, I understand I haven't been able to do this, and I'm thankful that you allow me to speak and let everyone know that I understand this and that I could dissolve my oath publicly and walk away from this, so everyone knows I'm not an oath breaker, and that I'm willing to stand before everyone and kind of, take my responsibility. And that, I think, is a huge thing. So applying these ideas to the oath of marriage is just as important. And obviously it's not the best way we want to go. We want things to work out. We want the family to be strong. We want all of those pro extending of the family, pro strengthening of the tribe and strengthening of the frith. But sometimes it doesn't always work out, especially modern things like today. Could be everything from if your significant other suddenly develops a terrible drug addiction, and you're trying to help them and there's no chance in helping them, and it's starting to affect everything in your life. We would be amiss to say that you have to suffer for the wrongdoings and the illegitimacy of perhaps a person's deeds, when you can dissolve that oath and then try to help them get better. Maybe things will change in the future, but we allow that sense because I think practicality and truth and the resolve of common sense is so prevalent in our faith, as opposed
that
to
is extremely important. To hear the horns on helmet or the romanticized version of every single oath being until the death, and better to die than to break your oath. And I get that. I get the principle of your oath is binding, and that's the point. And the point is consequence. If you have an oath, it's incumbent upon you to try to fix it before you seek out of it, to try to maintain the balance before it's severed. But at no point for our ancestors or for us in modern times is the idea of the oath that one party of the oath should spend the rest of their existence miserable because the circumstances that were fundamental to the original oath taking have changed. One of the big things about an oath is that it's not just immediately abandoned. The oath impels you to work it out and to try to find an honorable finishing of the oath. And that's why coming before the Gothar, coming before your peers, having it adjudicated in some way is important. And it's one of the reasons that the AFA doesn't believe in performing non-legally binding marriages, because it's not something you just cast off and throw away without consequence. No, there needs to be a process. There needs to be a process of trying to resolve it. And if it is completely unresolvable, then a process for honorably having it settled and move on to something different. But it is really important to realize the equation is never meant for one person to bear the entire burden of the oath and to live in misery because the person that they oath with doesn't fulfill their end or fundamentally changes the deal. That's not real. That's not realistic. That never has been since the dawn of time and continues to not be to this day. So this one is just for you, Svan. Could you elaborate a little bit on individuality and why it is important to be yourself when practicing Asatru?
Well, I would think that in relation to Yule, individuality is about a chance to reassess your year that has passed and the projection of what you will be in the year to come. What the individual is in relation to the folk. Your tinsel strength, the merit of your being is so highly important. And it oftentimes, I think Yule is a great time to reflect and to look at oneself and to look at where you stand and what you can offer or perhaps what you've detracted from. And it's an honest look, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, you're not thrashing or flogging yourself in this sense, but it's like, this year I did a lot of this, but I really wish I could have done this. Perhaps maybe the reasons why, and, really looking at yourself. I think it's a great meditative state when we talk about ourselves as not moving, maybe physically or, figuratively, but sitting still and looking at ourselves and what worth and merit we have upon ourselves. Doing this, and I think a lot of people, if they have too much hubris, they don't ever do this. And that, again, in many cultures of Aryan faiths, whether it's the Hellenics or the Gauls or the Germanics or the Teutonic and the Slavs, it's always about that sense. That's a doomful thing to have that sense of no sense of improvement. But I think it's also important for people that if they do it too much, another thing is to not go into, as Herul says, which is perfect, navel gazing, and just kind of overly introverting their thoughts into themselves, and then that becomes excusatory. Oh, I'm not doing stuff because I'm busy working on myself. And so you don't want to fall into that trap either. You want to try to find the best applicable point between what you can do as an individual. And really, the big thing I would say is what you can control. Not blowing yourself out of the idea of, problems and situations outside of your capabilities. Focus on what you have in your hands. Focus on what you can attain and work with that. That will actually broaden the horizon far more than the speculation of it, if you will. And it's just, I think it's really about, especially in relation to Yule, is about opening yourself up to the skeins of earth, the skeins of weird that will lead you down paths that you might not have even conceptualized. I certainly have had quite a few this year where just ended up things worked out the way they did. And it was a beautiful thing. And I had some experiences that I don't think I would have ever had if I overly analyzed the situation and said, look, I can't do this because the XYZ number or things of that nature. So, kind of opening yourself to the moment is important, and not letting yourself kind of get drawn out in the things you can't control.
All right. So next question. With the recent collapse of the NJP, can you talk about what goes into building a successful pro-white organization that will last the test of time?
Sure. The NJP, I'm thinking military non-judicial punishment?
I think the National Justice Party.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't.
Oh,
sorry, I went to another area. I was like,
I don't think of myself as old, but in my 42 years, I've seen some things. In my time since I came home to Asatru, it's been about 22 years, 22, 23-ish years. Thinking about it, I have seen lots and lots and lots of different groups that are involved in circles that I'm in, or in adjacent circles that are, I think would qualify in what you mentioned as pro-white groups. I've seen them come and go and come and go and come and go and come and go over and over and over again. There's some fundamentals. If you want anything that lasts and stands the test of time, it has to be about, first, it has to be about something positive, something that you want to achieve or to see or to accomplish or to embrace, not about something that you are against. If your group exists to oppose something, then the second that thing is done and gone and the moment passes, or the focus changes to something else, then the fundamental that bonded everyone together is no longer there and it falls apart. So it has to be positive thinking. It has to be focused on positive values, positive goals, things that you're trying to do, not things that you're standing in opposition to. It has to be defined by its own merits and not by a lack of merit of something else. Secondly, And we say politics, but I don't even think that's fair. Politics at least is supposed to imply governance and being elected to positions and doing things and some kind of actual influence. And I haven't seen a lot of that. Groups that we call political are about getting together and complaining about stuff, or maybe wearing skull masks and going someplace and loudly complaining about stuff. But I haven't seen a lot of actual political things happen because of them. But I would also say this, and I've said it many times on here. Politics are temporary. They're based upon circumstance. They're based upon where you're located, responses to specific stresses within your governing structure. Over the course of time and the course of society, politics change in a myriad ways. Values, belief, religion is timeless because those values shape themselves in relation to the circumstance, but the value remains eternal. It may be expressed differently in different situations. So say that's a big part of it too. The other thing is, and this goes towards the first point, but if I think having attainable goals that you can accomplish and then move on to new and evolved goals is really important. And I think that's something in any of these other groups, be they Asatru or not. And so some of the groups that I've seen come and go are political. Many of them that I've seen are nominally Asatru, but they're Asatru, but based on fads of social justice, or based on Viking LARP, or based on other nonsense. And that's problematic because the less authentic whatever you're a part of is, the less ingrained it is in your soul, in your family, and in your life, the more disposable it is at a whim when you find the next shiny thing that you want to move to. I would also say one of the most toxic, terrible things that I've seen, and I see this is something that our people do to each other constantly, up to including today, and it's really, really sad. We are our own worst enemies, and we engage in purity spiral. And I think that people hear that and like, oh yeah, purity spiral, and then they move on to the next thought, but we all have a tendency to do that. If our focus is always fighting inward on the guy that has 95% of things in common with me and 5% that we disagree on, we will whittle ourselves down continually into insignificance and nothingness and eventually complete disillusion. And I speak out against it, try to fight it every way I know how. A lot of our people are just stuck there, and it may take time for them to grow up, it may take years for them to gain wisdom and listen to those of us who've seen this happen. But when you have somebody that's literally 95% in agreement with you, but you choose to focus on the 5% that separates you, that is a surefire recipe towards insignificance and failure. And we've seen it happen a million times. May see it happen a million more. Best we can do, and what we are doing, is carving out a place for ourselves to build that golden age in the husk of what's around us. And we're doing that. We're building towards permanence. And if all the purity spiralers would stop and people would grow up and get on the team, we'd accomplish more faster and better. But we'll accomplish regardless, and we are. And we can see that with our Hofs. We can see it with Sigerheim. It's certainly a testament to that we have, while other people out in the world are tearing statues down, we're erecting statues. But absolutely, you've got to build what you want based around a positive identity. So this is another thing about specific to Asatru. When Asatru groups have been based around their definition of Asatru is how not Christian they are, they don't have anything positively to rally behind. Their point in existence is to oppose another faith. They have, at their outset, laid out the game, accepting the terms that this other faith is the dominant faith, and any move they do is going to be a reaction to that other faith. And it denies them an identity of themselves and a path forward to grow and to evolve. All they can do is counter move something else that they don't like or that they disagree with. One of the biggest evolutions of modern Asatru was when we evolved past the phase of, look, Ma, we're not Christian, to, okay, what does it mean to be loyal to the Aesir? And to define ourselves solely in terms of our relationship to our gods or a lack of that relationship. When we've taken the world on our own terms, that's where we've laid foundations for the future. I mentioned earlier, we're about ready to start the 30th year of the Asatru Folk Assembly. In the history of the world, 30 years sounds insignificant. But all of us that have been around for a little while know that in the circles that we often find ourselves in, 3 decades in, 3 solid decades that is quite an achievement. And one of the other things that is a massive intangible to that, but that has allowed us to achieve what we have and is propelling us to achieve more, is being allied with and on the right side of the gods. The favor of our gods, behaving in a way, doing things in a way, building in a way that is pleasing to them is the best thing you can do in order to be successful and have longevity. And doesn't mean that we always get it right. Certainly we don't. But it does mean that our intention is to try to do the right thing. And I hope and I believe that we have been pleasing to our gods. And I hope that we continue to do so. I'll do everything in my power to ensure that we do. But that focus on the gods and focus on something eternal as opposed to on something fleeting and situational sets you up for generational success as well, I think. But I've kind of beat this one to death. Svan, what are your thoughts on this?
It's another one of those cliche points that we could say. We all have heard it before, that culture is downstream from spirituality, that there is a greater call of the soul of the people that then begets down the mentality and the physicality of the people. And we are working on battles on all those fronts as individuals and as groups. But it's worth noting that I think when we talk about perhaps the desire of action and all of these things, I understand that. I think that it's a deeply intrinsic part of our folk. It's an intrinsic part of our men folk, whether they are, of the ethnic faith of our people or if they're of another faith, foreign faith, they are still folk. And I think that manifests in a lot of ways for many people. So telling young folks like, hey, your spiritualism is so important, often, again, is lost on them because they're youthful and they're unwise. And as we grow wiser and we grow older, we learn. And this seems to be a repeated kind of cycle within itself. We haven't quite reached a point in which the youth of our folk are actually looking at the wisdom of their elders, their clergy, their the leaders of their people in a way. They haven't quite made that connection yet. And so a lot of times there's everything from ignorance or ignoring to straight out scoffing. And then, over time, as you see these things happen, you can only but say, I've seen this happen before. It's not I told you so. It's I've seen this happen before. I'm saying what I'm saying because I have seen it time and time again. And so I think that there is a massive importance that we look at our people building something for themselves within themselves as an individual and as a community. And that is more important than shaking your fists at things. There is a great amount of, when we talk about people who claim that they're oppressed all the time, and then it's like, okay, well, how are you oppressed as opposed from other people? And sometimes they fall short on a lot of things unless they try to shift the window. We, on the other hand, are saying, like, okay, if we have a problem, we need to fix it within ourselves and amongst ourselves. And we should try to do that consistently. And over time, we know we're not going to get it overnight. Not everything's going to be perfect and shiny right out the gate. This is a generational thing that's going to take a lot of time. And I think that some of these movements or these ideas of whether it's political activation or, doing things, in activism just in general. And I think, people think about activism as like there's political activism and then there's just activism, which is community building. And you should greatly consider the spiritual activism as a huge component to who you are as a person. Another thing that I was really hit on that really kind of I wanted to bring up too was the purity spiraling effect is always about fragmentation. I think that a lot of people that denote purity spiraling or like that try to create it, that utilize it as a catalyst, oftentimes are trying to break things down into their own personal pools in which they can be like the kingfish. And that has a big problem as well. Our people have always suffered from this. The Romans knew that the Germanic people could be scattered if they were not united. And the best way to do that was to, get to purity spiral against each other or to break, certain things or accept certain things and so on and so forth. And so there was this absolute lack of unification under one banner. The whole story of Herman of the Cherusci is kind of a warning to that. So I think that a lot of people, when you should look at the wisdom and the idea of how a spiritual group that's looking at the common sense pathways, that's looking at the broad framework to work in. They're achieving goals and doing things, but they're not trying to hyper focus on one singular thing. And I see it all the time, especially around this time with Yule. And there's a lot of like, oh, you're celebrating Yule in December. It's supposed to be in January, according to the way our ancestors did it. And I'm like, you're hyper focusing on like the Anglo-Saxons and their lunar calendar. And you're not looking at what we're doing right now. You would rather kind of raise your nose up to all of this stuff going on in order to manifest some nugget that you think is like super important. And all the while your ancestors are just going like, why? Like, stop. So, the overall point of purity spiraling can sometimes lead to the fragmentation, and fragmentation leads to being easily controlled. People that build big and join under a banner and get together, but have the room to do things, to make their own congregations around in the area, but everyone is in the same page, pulling onto the same pushing up the same hill, you'll find that that kind of activism has a longer standing point. And then you learn from each other. The mistakes and the victories of each other spread. And that's what allows the whole of the group to attain traction in a lot of things. And you try to tell people this, you try to show people this, and it doesn't matter how much you do or say, they're still gonna, hold on to like the minutia of one tiny thing. And I would say to anybody who's out there, there's wisdom in all people. There's in a lot of circles and things like that, or there's at least a table that you can glean wisdom from at everyone that you sit down. But you should look at the overall and see where that wisdom is coming from. And that is, if you see these kind of activist groups popping up and down, and they're falling apart for various reasons, whether it's internal struggles, purity spiraling, a woman, like I've seen the relationship dynamic destroy people before that were trying to do something that had nothing to do with relationships, but yet here they are. That kind of stuff it's like gang mentality. It's street gang, kind of pack dog mentality. You need to step away from that and realize the idea of generation, culture, folk as a people, a tribe, a nation of thought that can move forward. And we need to do it now, because you don't want to do it later when it's, far past its usefulness.
No, the best time to plant trees is always 20 years ago.
Right.
That's a metaphorical thing, but it's also like a real gardening thing. The best time to plant those things is generations ago. Second best time is right now. First, I want to acknowledge Yeager Kuningaz for the $10 donation. Hail the gods, hail the folk, hail the AFA. Thank you. We appreciate you $10. I'd also like to say this. So a couple of things as far as longevity, and your fault, you opened up a can here, and we're just going to keep going on all these things because it's really important to what we do. Do you want to accomplish something? Do you want to build something? Or do you want to be the coolest guy in the room? Those things are often mutually exclusive. And I've seen this a lot. One of the things, and I'll speak for myself in this, and I know it sounds self-serving because of where I'm sitting, but there's a path that led me here. I wasn't always sitting in the big chair. When I first got involved in Asatru and was looking at what to do, everybody's trying to break off in their own little thing. Everybody knows some way to do it better because the people who are out there doing it before us, they're doing something wrong. So I know better. I'll start my new thing. And for the longest time in Asatru, that's all we were doing. We were starting again at year one every year because somebody new comes along with some new, like Svan was saying, oh, well, you see, actually, these one tribe of our people celebrated Yule in January, so you're doing it wrong. And we still see that today. And what it occurred to me as a truth at the time, and this was a situation that I faced. There was a group of people that I was involved with because I knew one of the guys when I first got involved in Asatru, called the Heathen Folk Revival. Has anyone here heard of the Heathen Folk Revival? Say that rhetorically, because I assume probably not, because it didn't go anywhere. Because it was three dudes wanting to be the king of stuff rather than getting involved in something that already has progress towards a goal, rather than being part of a movement that's taking us somewhere. everyone wants to start their own thing, because the truth is most people would much rather be edgelords and virtue signal and be the king of their group of 5 fat guys in camp chairs arguing over the big piece of chicken, of the rotisserie chicken.
I knew you were going to use this.
Yeah, but it's a thing. I use it because it is a real example. You have theodesmen that their theodism was based seriously around which of the fat dudes in camp chairs could claim to be the king of the fat dudes in camp chairs. And there's like 5 of them, and they're arguing over their kingdom of rotisserie chicken and like 2-liter Mountain Dews. And if that's what's important to you, that you're Yokozuna of the 5 fat guys and you get the best chicken piece, do that. But that doesn't build anything for the future. It occurred to me very early on when I wanted to be a folk builder from Alaska that an AFA folk builder for the backwater that was Alaska is better than the high exalted grand lord of the micro state that is the, you know, whatever basement theode of 5 fat dudes. Like, it just was, something was going somewhere. And the other thing was a constant fight over position so you can rule your kingdom of nothingness. And be part of something that moves forward. I didn't even know they made it that far. So kudos to Morris Taylor over in the chat room that says the Heathen Folk Revival actually had YouTube videos 12 years ago. That is further than I thought that they made it. But yeah, it was much more important to me at the time to be part of something that was going to be here for my children and my grandchildren. And at that point, the AFA was, you know, again, it was the longest running Asatru organization in existence. And at that point, it was 10 years old, 11 years old. Earlier than that, when I actually started wanting to be sort of involved, but when I became, you know, all the way involved, it was like 10 years old. But that's the farthest we'd made it, because the crab in the bucket, man, anybody tries to succeed and you've got to pull them back down, because you've got to be the crab that's the highest up in the bucket. Don't worry about all the crabs getting out of the bucket. No, you've got to be the highest crab in the bucket. So we got to pull everybody else down. But being part of that life all the way through when I was just a folk builder from Alaska, because I was part of something. It was part of something we were building, and we had a dream of what we were trying to accomplish. And, you know, here I am, however many years later, gave my daughter at a Hoff with other AFA kids, and to grow up in a world, she'll never know a world that doesn't have Hoffs to our gods. That's something we did together because we stood the test of time together, because people stuck around, stuck it out, and prioritized the future over their present. And we're not arguing over rotisserie chicken. We're sitting at 4 Hoffs to our gods, raising statues to our founder and his wife at land that eventually numerous are going to live on, that we're going to build a Hoff to Lord Tyr on, that we're going to build a great hall for the AFA on. So this is a long-winded answer to your one question. But you have to be committed towards a future that you're genuinely going to commit your life towards. If it's just about being an edgelord or looking cool, then you go from fad to fad to fad, jumping from lily pad to lily pad, and you don't build anything. If you're committed to what you're leaving for your children and your grandchildren, you're much better positioned to build something lasting. And I think we've about beat that topic to death, but it's really, really important. And that's why I think it was important to spend some time on. The next one is just for you, Svan.
All right.
What dead Germanic languages do you know? I remember you mentioned Gothic before. Also, do you know Anglo-Saxon?
Well, the key in that phrase is "do you know?" The threshold of what that might mean. Conversationally, none. And I'll be the first to admit it. I think that in pronunciation and study of language, I know a smattering of the three majors, which would be Old Norse, Anglo-Saxon, and Gutsika or Gutsika, Gothic language, the Gothic tongue. And mainly it's a point of research in which trying to find the coalescence between those. I'm not too familiar with, say, like the evolution of German specifically, like low and high, and more of the proto-central Germanic languages. I'm not super familiar, or like Frisian into Dutch. Again, a little bit. But the three major ones that I really try to stick to is the high north, the high west, and the high east. And I'm really trying to utilize that more for an understanding of the meaning of Yule, and how it's that's one word that really kind of hits all three of those. And in that triangle kind of shows the expansiveness of the language and the interconnectedness between our religion. What makes our religion an ethnic religion is because it spans, and it's, maybe variantly different, but it unifies us all very, very much. And that's mainly through language. But so I would say, just to be honest, like, none to a level in which I have seen as a lot of other people, like Leonardo Eld English, or Jackson Crawford, or some of the other people on YouTube that are very specifically like, and these kind of like polyglot speakers who I'm just super envious of, and their ability to kind of bring these languages back to life and to speak them, or to be able to read like the book of Matthew in Gothic, is amazing to me. But I've gotten to a point where I can, in combination with perhaps books and maybe like side notes of linguistic translations, I can start putting things together and connecting them to other things without being prompted. So, I mean, and it surprises a lot of people too. I'm a big proponent for modern English as a viable mode in which we speak to the gods. But there is a power and an understanding of perhaps utilizing Old Norse as an ecclesiastical language. It's very important, I think, for our Gothar to understand things and concepts and how to reference and to present to the folk, tangible and proper translations. Because I have seen people just kind of translate really, really well in certain areas, and then other ones are just kind of glossing and glancing. But I do like the idea of us also speaking to the gods in our language as it has evolved. And I talk about that a lot. I was even talking about that this weekend. Just the Anglicization of Lady Frigg to Frigga and things like that. I find language super interesting, and the means in which we communicate ideas and spiritual concepts. It's just the problem is we got to be careful about people that might seek to translate with the intention of guiding towards perhaps an intended goal, instead of kind of laying concepts before people in order for them to kind of receive them and mull them over and try to understand them and become better for them. The other thing I would say is that we need to get away from the purity spiraling, if you will. We can't say Ostera, we have to say Eostera. And I think Alcerigo, they can attest to it. I did that too. When I first came into the Asatru Folk Assembly, I was kind of doing that. And so that is a deep reflection upon myself as well. Where, speaking about Yule as Yeola from the Anglo-Saxon, and, we should use a G instead of a Y. And it's like, but people don't know these things. And it really, is it that important as opposed to more or less getting people to celebrate Yule together? It's far more important than harping over whether or not we use a G or a Y. So language is a huge pet project of mine, but it is by no means, I think, the driving force within our spiritual goals and teachings to the folk about what we're trying to do and what they should try to do at their homes and teaching their children. Making the gods a welcome power in our lives is first, and then understanding and ruminating on the relationship that our ancestors had with the gods is probably second, or maybe even third, because I would say, the other is to align with your community and get with the cultural practice of the community and understanding, stop trying to pick and purity spiral things apart. Why are you not practicing Alvar bloat and Diesel bloats in February in Iceland during the 11th century? Why are you guys, why are you guys doing this? It's comical now, and it's kind of like the turkey or the chicken leg analogy, which does kind of fit. And I would say, just to speak to that too a little bit, is that finding and utilizing language to build that relationship with the gods is most important. And it's the same way as it's constantly looking better as towards a better horizon than, focusing on this is good enough for us now. The backyard is good. And then perhaps somebody's like, well, I'm going to build a shed, and that's going to be a hoff to the gods. And we are doing small incremental steps, but we're never settling for those. It's always about kind of broader horizons, bigger. The gods deserve more. What are we going to do to get bigger, better, stronger?
Victory never sleeps.
Exactly. It all loops down to that.
It really does. And I know this was a question asked to Svan, but you get my 2 cents anyway. Language is awesome, and it's a really good tool to understand how our ancestors saw something, how they saw the world, how they related to their gods. And if you're studying language, etymology is more important to me than definition, because definition takes on silly nonsense of the day. Etymology traces language towards its roots and explains the course of how a word came to mean what it means and what its base root is. And it's really important. But all of that is a tool. I will guarantee you this. Loki is much more educated on our gods than Svan or myself. Surtur knows much more about the cosmos than either Svan nor I. My point isn't to be smarter than the forces of chaos. My point is to be better and more noble and more in favor of the Aesir, of whom I stand loyal to. Winning the favor of the gods is the key. If education and learning language helps you do that better, helps you build a stronger and a better relationship with your gods, then absolutely it is fantastic. You can know all kind of stuff, and if you don't put it into practice and it doesn't bring you closer, it's for naught. That's what's really important to keep in mind. And the thing is, when you purity spiral on stuff like that, it becomes silly. Oh, well, you need to pronounce it in Old Saxon. Well, screw that. I'm better than you. I can do it in Old Norse. Well, guess what? I can do it in Gothic. Well, what kind of grunts did the cavemen make when they were celebrating Yule? What's the appropriate grunt, armpit fart noise, pattern that says Yule? It's silly at that point. What's a much better thing is to understand what it meant to our ancestors at different points in time, and then to add to the tapestry of our folk by expressing what it means to you. Part of Victory Never Sleeps is we're not resting on the laurels of our Viking ancestors. No, just as they carried the torch forward from our Celtic ancestors and from our Neolithic ancestors, we're carrying the torch forward for them. And, one day we'll have people, on Alpha Centauri somewhere going over minutia of how I expressed things on Victory Never Sleeps or how Svan responded. But that's how we move this forward. And if we're not moving it forward, we're not worthy of our ancestors. So that's really, really important. But no, linguistics is awesome, and it adds so much to it. And it's one of the cool things that Svan's able to bring to the table is a different perspective on that, and to add to the depth of our understanding of our sources of lore. Next question. Did Ragnarok already happen, or should we be prepping for it? Yes and yes. So, as we've said on this program before, but it's hard to wrap our heads around. This is much like when I talked about prayer earlier. We can't use the English language to express how the gods process information or receive our prayers. So we resort to what we are familiar with to do our best to approximate it, but it's not perfect. Our gods and our lore exist in mythic time, meaning the chronological events of our lore have happened, are happening, and will happen simultaneously. And that's hard for us to wrap our heads around. It took me a long time to wrap my head around it as well. For example, Balder. Is Balder a baby on the lap of Frigg? Is he the shining best youth of the gods? Is he currently slain and being entertained by Hel in the underworld? Or is he returned in glory and in splendor, welcoming in the golden age? Depending on where you're at and how you want to relate to him and your understanding and your relationship in your circumstance, he is any of those things, or he is all of those things. And that's a lot, and it doesn't make linear sense in the way that we're used to, but it's true nonetheless. One thing that we've seen through our lore is, yes, we should always be preparing for Ragnarok. Not in the sense of it being finality. We spoke earlier about how time happens in cycles, but when looked at three-dimensionally, hopefully it happens in spirals, and each time it comes around, we're better and better and better prepared for it. But we should always be preparing so that we maintain a state of readiness. The Havamal talks about this. That said, we may never see the need for the readiness. Sometimes, the more readiness you have, the more cataclysm passes you by because it can't take you. And this, I don't mean any of that silly, but the better prepared we are, the more often we don't actually have to fight battles that would come our way, because we're so well prepared that the enemy doesn't want to test us. One of the things I found when I was bouncing, and I know one of these stories goes back to Matt's bouncing glory days. I do that a lot, but I learned so much from it. When I started and I was ill prepared and I didn't know what I was doing and I didn't know how to fight and I didn't know what I was capable of and I was scared of things, I fought a lot. As I matured and perfected my skills and grew in confidence and knew how to handle situations, I had to fight less and less because I was prepared. And people saw in my face and read in all the nonverbals that if they wanted to take it there, that I was ready. And so they just chose not to. And I think that's one of the best things in staving off, cycles of Ragnarok, is through preparedness and through being in a martial mindset to where we're ready if battles come our way. I'll say this on prepping too, though. Playing the odds, there's a lot of people that have wasted their life building bunkers instead of building relationships with their families. And the great zombie apocalypse never happened in their lifetime. But they could have been good dads, and they could have been good husbands, and they could have been good grandpas. But instead they were obsessing over something that never really happened in their lifetime. So I think that anything we do to prepare for the future should be of benefit in the here and now as well. There's something really good to be said for planning for the future, but plan for success. Don't plan for failure all the time. One of the big things about Sigerheim, and I meant to talk about this a little bit when we had the question about what should a pro-white organization do to have longevity and to not just fade away. Building things that are intended for the future, having dreams. One of the things with Sigerheim, we want to get as many of our people that we can to come out and live around us. Now, AFA leadership, a number of us are going to live on site, but the dream of Sigerheim isn't that. That's the nucleus. But the rest is to get more people to come to Jackson County, Tennessee. Once you get more people there, what's special about it is things keep going just the way they are. Awesome. We'll have more of our people around to share with, to benefit from, to celebrate, to build the world we want to see from. If things get worse, well, great. We're prepared to take care of each other and we can lean on each other for strength. If things get drastically better, awesome. We're in the best position to maximize that. So it's something that wins in all scenarios. The more we can concentrate on our preparation, basing it upon things that are beneficial today and tomorrow, that positions us best to take the hits of the future. So don't focus on doom porn as far as your preparation. Make sure you maintain a state of readiness all the time and build and grow from there, as opposed to planning on terrible things happening to you, because that creates a spiral of, focus on negativity that I don't think is that we're well served with. What do you have to say about this, Svan?
I think you hit it quite well. I don't know. I don't really have anything more to add to that.
No, tonight I've been taking a bunch of the questions first, and I will try to adjust that a little bit. That's not fair.
No, yeah, you numerous times have I got a point. Oh, he's hitting it now. Never mind.
Does the AFA have an official stance on reincarnation? If there is reincarnation, can/how could you speak to an ancestor that is currently alive unbeknownst to us now? So you raise a really good question. And that's something that occurred to me a lot when I first got involved in Asatru. I don't know if we still have any of Svan's soul illustrations handy. Our souls have multiple parts. Though it is possible in a rare and exceptional circumstance for a person to fully reincarnate, that is not what typically happens. What typically happens is that pieces of our soul complex can be bequeathed to those who come after us, but the usness of our soul goes on to our ancestors, or perhaps, if we've earned the favor of the gods, ascends to something greater. But pieces of your luck, of your haminya, those things can be passed down through a family line, can be enhanced and drawn towards a person. If you name one of your children after a kinsman of yours who had some greatness to them, doing that is a request beyond the veil to have some of that luck, some of that person's glory reflected in that child. So there we go. Yay, Nick. There are pieces, and Svan can do it. So here we go, Svan. I will just kick that over to you. Yes, the AFA does have a stance on reincarnation. No, typically you don't 100% reincarnate. It's more like pieces of your luck can reincarnate. But what you said is very valid. If you're trying to talk to your grandfather at your altar, your grandfather can't simultaneously be your daughter. Your grandfather needs to exist somewhere as your grandfather to engage in that gift cycle with you. All for that. And I use that particular example because I named my daughter Aubrey after my grandfather. Svan, can you break down your soul complex with the chalice diagram for us, please?
Yeah, we talk about the essence of the leak or the body. Of course, that goes away when we pass from this world and go beyond the veil. So the idea again is that if the concepts of the soul and the portions of the soul that are bequeathed to the bloodline in a very particular cycle, which is important as to why the cycle exists, there's not an old body that's, it's a new body, and that therein lies the kind of the predication for everything else, is that the soul, or the identity of the soul, and that which is, goes to oftentimes what we refer to as the folk soul, but it's the greater kind of accumulation of all that soul might. And we know that our ancestors talked often about the haminya of our lines being kind of given or passed down or attained upon birth, and that there are parts of our folk soul that are passed on. So when we pass away, the body and the ego kind of fall down into the chalice. The memories and the thoughts fall into that reservoir of what is the soul, the soul. And so all of these things that make us as an individual living in the middle world right now fall into the soul. And perhaps there's residue of the hammer that exists in the world. If we have great might and great power, it can exude itself into the world. Sometimes we see this in manifestations of imagery of the souls enacting during times of great turmoil or great strife or great might and power. To see the great kings exuding themselves on the stones in which they were anointed and bequeathed their power has just as much a value. That part of that is those reflections of those pieces that fall into the soul. And we have the woad self, which can also exude itself through long generations, our actions, our deeds. But it ultimately falls back down into the soul. And there the soul is connected with the Haminya that we built in our life, and the Haminya that we were also given from the generations before. And all of this is kind of fueled in vehicle by the Filkja. The Filkja is that primordial connection to the folk soul while we are living, and thus returns us back to it. And as Alziragothi spoke about the bequeathment of fragments, now the details of this is not really known. I would think it would be kind of disingenuous to say, oh yes, we know that the ancestors bequeath this and that. That's not exactly the reason why things are beyond the veil, is because they're obfuscated from perhaps a mortal understanding in clarity. But we do know this, that once we pass through and enter into the point of the folk soul, there is a way in which our ancestors can again see us through a threshold of water, a wellspring, if you will. And there is a root there. And that root, the symbology, the meaning of the root, and why there's a root in the lower world, drawing back up into the realm of the gods, is important. The circulatory system of the cosmos is Yggdrasil, and it's very important. I think a lot of people get caught up in the idea that it has to be this pillar and a foundation, and they try to move the roots around without taking into consideration the point of the circulatory system and what all of those levels mean. So when we talk about ascension and that lifting up, there could be a lifting from here in the middle, and there can be a lifting in the beyond the veil, our ancestors being exalted, or that they can then lift up things that benefit their bloodline to be disseminated back into the middle world in our descendants. And so those things, again, manifest in Haminya. They manifest in might, power, luck, all of these things, and sometimes memory, sometimes thought. They continue to exude on, and it becomes kind of like a boon that if you have the ability, if you build a relationship with your ancestors beyond the veil, and you work with them and honor them in great amounts, then it is a way in which they can bequeath upon you benefits to help you proceed forward. And I think that's why Asatru kind of came back in a wave, in an essence. There was clearly Founder McNallen was caught the wind that blew through Yggdrasil, as it's often referred to, in which these kind of this moment that our ancestors sent up and started to lay the foundation of the folk feeling that desire to come back, overwhelmingly so, and it was across the board. So the idea of a one-for-one reincarnation is not necessarily something that we look at. It's not like you pass and then you pop back out as a child or a grandchild, but that you reservoir yourself with the great collective of the soul of your folk, whether it's your bloodline, but also the greater folk. And we don't quite, a lot of people speculate as exactly what that conglomeration could be. But we do know that the ancestors that we work with then do have the ability to place upon or elevate themselves up, sometimes through great deeds or through honoring by those living in the middle world. These deeds are kind of exalted and spoken of, and the gods then place this soul might in the form of an Alvar or a Disir, because a lot of people don't conceptualize like, oh, I'm praying to my ancestors, but I'm praying to the Disir. Are they the same? Yes. Are they in the same place? No. One is clearly seen as kind of presiding over, and that's a result of that exaltation, or that the soul might is then brought up to the gods, and the gods really kind of have that determination. I don't think that the gods, descend down into the underworld and weigh your heart with a feather and listen to your Filkja like a lawyer And that determines whether or not you get the strand or whether you go to your ancestors. As more is that the gods are kind of adjudicating what comes into the middle as everything is playing out, the skein of weird, the skein of earth. Our ancestors are vested in the acceptance of you and you bringing in more than what you left with. And that cycle is about empowering them with your deeds, with your nobility. And you should be concerned about the gods witnessing you now and marking you with the sense of being witness, as they're meting out that doom in the well that is in heaven, and mark you for greatness, witness your deeds. But you also want your ancestors to see that you are making them proud, you are giving them great honors, and when you return to them, you bring more, and that you're not spurned by them and left be a kind of an outlaw or an Utgard of your own folk soul. So that's hugely important in that whole relation of the circulatory movements of soul and soul power, and why our meta language, our stories talk about that upper world, that middle world, and that lower world, and why it's so important that the roots are placed where they are placed, and why those wells are placed where they are placed. So I hope that's the best explanation, or at least gives some grounding in the correct, perhaps, way to mull over the ideas of a lot of the stuff in the lore and the way that our ancestors do talk about things in relation to death and the returning of the soul is components of the soul, because we are multiple pieces and some of them are made here and stay here, in particularly like the lik, the body. And sometimes our hammer, pieces of it remain here. But there are other things that pass through and on. And ultimately, the ek is what stays in the folk soul. And that is the grandfather or grandmother that you are speaking to at the harrow when you give, gift and oblige your loyalty and troth to your ancestors at the harrow. That's what you're speaking to, is their ek and their hamingya and their overall their might. And whether they attained their woth self in the living, that can predecess down and exalt up again, if you will.
Lou Nickerson gave us $20. Thanks, Lou. We appreciate you. Hail the gods, hail the folk, hail the AFA. To address something, there's a little bit of talking about Sigerheim and Tennessee geography going on over in the chat. So here's the thing. Jackson County is a very sparsely populated county. It's also a tiny county. Getting people in Jackson County is very significant. If you live anywhere in Jackson County, you're within a 30-minute drive of the Hoff. 30-minute drive's nothing, and it puts you in that village that we are building. But yeah, as other people are mentioning out there, the closest thing to the closest city is Cookeville. Cookeville's awesome. It's got anything you can want. It's a big enough city, got tons of stuff. And as it stands right now, it's about 35, 40 minutes away from Sigerheim. That's not bad. That's not a bad drive. It's not a bad commute. That's really not a bad situation. So, that's where I'm looking at going to the gym when I move out there. So that's going to be a daily back and forth. It is what it is, but it gets us out to where we can build a community. And there's a lot of stuff there. And I see that Morris over on the side is looking for places to live and stuff to do. There's tons of stuff there if you look, and if you stretch it out a little bit further, there's a lot more. But just keep in mind that the counties out there are very, very small. All right. What else we got tonight? Question from Brody. Why is Odin known as the Yule Father? Svan, why is Odin known as the Yule Father?
Okay, this is an interesting question, and this Yule in particular has given me, especially and the podcast itself too. This is one of those things I was definitely looking into. one thing is when we look at the etymology of the word Yol, and what its possibilities as to what it could mean in relation to the turning of something, that is it's a speculation. We don't quite fully know. We can etymologically follow back to a certain point, and then after that it becomes speculative. I've heard a lot of interesting theories on it. One thing that I wanted to kind of hit right out of the gate is that you might hear people say, oh, well, that word isn't actually a Germanic word. I find this a lot when I discuss this with people, on social media. And one of the things I've been noticing is this trend towards, everything that's pagan is actually really Christian. And one of the ones in this argument that kind of popped up that really was like, oh, that's a cute kind of opinion, is that it comes from the Greek word Euliebus. It's the derivative of the word jubilee, and it comes from the Greeks. But the weight of that is very low because we see this kind of cross-cultural usage of the word with other meanings outside of simply a celebration. It has great connections to the essence of turning, or the ability to turn, and that is where we see its usage having an interesting sense. Much like when we speak of the Nornir as witches, the word witcha, which means ultimately to twist or to turn, the idea of turning threads or turning fate. So Yol also has this connotation, and it's worth noting that one of the poetic words for the gods as a whole was Yolnar, the idea of all of the gods having the ability to turn, which again re-emphasizes what I've been pointing at with the idea of the gods being able to mete out the doom or the boon of men, is that when they gather at the wellspring in heaven, they are twisting and enacting their will in the world by both great things and minute things. And that, I think, is something that was understood by our ancestors. So the Yolnar in that usage would be the beings with the ability to turn things, and we, to shape and spin. The specific name Yolnir, you'll hear most people say, it's a title of Odin, and it is absolutely utilized as a title of Odin. But I wanted to bring up that Yolnar is also a title for the gods themselves, and I think that is where it originates from, is because the connection to Lord Odin in relation to the turning time of the year is such a huge importance, and especially amongst the predecessors that gave us the most, which is the Angles and the Saxons. They had great emphasis and understanding, and that emphasis manifests predominantly in the wild hunt, and the idea that Lord Odin is somehow kind of breaking the skein of the water, the separation between the upper world and the middle world. That strength, or I guess the tensile strength of the water, I forgot what it's called, when it's the threshold of water and its ability to maintain its buoyancy or be broken, is that he's breaking that. That's what the wild hunt ultimately is. And that manifests again in the hunting of the boar that we get from the Anglo-Saxons. So there's a great emphasis on him kind of interceding between the worlds at this time and having a manifestation within the middle world that makes him so prevalent at this time of year. And so it would be natural to say that the one of the Yolnar is the Yol Father, is Yolnir. He is the one in manifestation, twisting around at this time, and then he does return. We speak about that return. We speak about that return as being, tonight is Odin's night, and this is the time in which the wild hunt comes to a rest, and he returns through the threshold and back into the upper world, and he has done his turning time of pulling and twisting fate and moving things around. And sometimes that turning and twisting can take in the form of kind of like what we would say is like great power, that a might of doom. So it has a tendency towards things being drastically shifted so much so that it kind of has a scary sense to it. And we have that all the time with Lord Odin as being Igur or Ig, the terrible or the awesome one, because of this ability, this power, this manifestation that makes him so unique. So I think that the time is a turning time, and that the gods are seen as their might in their ability to turn, but specifically with Lord Odin and his ability to turn things around this time is so important, that they all kind of link together with a sense of meaning behind these words. There is a later translations of the word Yule meaning a feast or a celebration. So it's not entirely, I see where people got the connection, but there are other meanings that are far precede the idea of a feast or a celebration. And that I think the turning time became celebratory. And so therefore it was a time of celebration. So the word became like in conjunction with feasting and celebration. But looking back further, we can see that it has far more of an older meaning, and I think it's expressly Germanic in the usage of the word, and it's one of those link words that we perhaps share with other Aryan branches like the Greeks or the Hellenics, the Greeks and the Romans, but that the meaning is very different in those two distinct branches. And to say that one beget the other, I think is a misnomer. But I would say too that the first time that it was ever really presented to the Norse that the word Yule comes from Odin is actually kind of like a loop. That was in there is an incomplete book called The Organization of the Norwegian Kings, a summarization or an organization or a list. And oftentimes it's referred to as Augrip, Agrip, but that's just a shortened word for Augrip av Norrex Konungen Sogium, which means the organization of the Norwegian Kings saga or sagas. And it's mentioned in there that Yule comes from Odin. And I think that was, done in, I can't remember when it was written, I think the 12th century. And that was kind of a looping back into explaining where the name Yule comes from in relation to, our ancestors were kind of, the conversion times were going through, and they were utilizing their knowledge based on Nordic only. But we can see it survives in the Gothic language. It survives in the Anglo-Saxon language. And so they were probably mistaken in that it was just simply contextualized in a Norse sense. So I think that's where it comes from. But it does have merit. It's just that I think the chronological importance of that is that it goes further back in our language. It's not entirely from the Greeks. I think it parallels linguistically with the Hellenics in the idea. But that causes a lot of confusion in present day.
All right. Michael Cosgrove with a $20 donation. Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you both for being available to us all, including those who are just curious. I'm glad that you feel that way. We try every way we know how to be as available as possible to all our folk. Our position as Gothar is extremely important to both Svan and myself, and I want everybody to know, everybody who hears this now, who hears this later, you can always reach out to us. That's what we're here for. We would love to hear from you and be able to help or answer questions as we can. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Our next question is for you, Svan. As an Icelander, is the stereotype of Nordics being cold, stoic, and introverted true?
And the surface, yes, I think it is. I think that a lot of people, and it has manifested differently with modernism, but yes, Nords, from my observation of my family, even myself and other folks, even though I'm less so because I've been raised here and I have, great, inclinations towards like individual, I guess freedoms, or if you will, or the senses of governance and so on. Whereas I think Nordic people nowadays are kind of listed more towards like governmental thinking and so on and so forth. You generally find that Nords are very distant at first, and sometimes you'll find out that they're very, very lively, and it could be and very hot and emotionally driven about a lot of things. But it's definitely buried under a social veneer of composure, which is important. You can't kind of just fly off the cuff all the time, and it's really important in the upper hemisphere, if you will, or in that area where you need to have that. And that's manifested in modernity. A lot of the passion has left away from a lot of Nordic people, and they look at things very logically, very stoically, what I would argue is almost to a fault, and they don't cut out enough. And sometimes it happens. I think that social lubricants, if you will, drinking and carousing, have their benefit to allowing people to see some of their more inner, joyousness or sometimes very hotly opinionated takes on things or so on and so forth. But as Nords kind of go on, they kind of, that's not very polite to do that anymore, so we shouldn't do that so much. And I'm not speaking about, I am painting in broad strokes, so bear in mind, I'm not talking about, every individual case. It's just an overall sense. Yes, I think that is something that you see, but it is a surface. There is a lot more underneath the Nordic folk that I have seen come out that's beautiful, can be very, very passionate or aggressive or just stalwart and just digging the heels in on something. That happens a lot in the Nordic cultures.
All right. Have you ever had to deal with post-prison folks coming into the AFA who still have that gangbang mentality? Yes. I think less over time, but we've certainly had our fair share of people coming to us from a variety of different backgrounds, but certainly, there's a sizable number of our folk that are first exposed to Asatru when they're incarcerated. A lot of those guys have come out and been dirtbags. A lot of those guys, some of those guys have come out and turned out to be great people that we've built a lot of good things around. And it's kind of a mixed bag. I think that what is I think the Asatru that a lot of people learn in prison environments is a very early stage of modern Asatru's development that kind of got passed on by a certain element inside without reflection of how our faith is currently practiced. I think some of that is hand-me-down things from, old timers in there that have done a lot of time. And I think it's developed its own personality that probably has a lot of very useful elements for that very specific circumstance. But I also think that biggest thing, okay, I think there's a better way of answering the question. The biggest problem that I've noticed with people who have found Asatru in prison or who spend a lot of time incarcerated, especially during their formative years, is that their view of the world, and in turn their view of Asatru, is very, very small. They're used to a world that has been very deliberately limited to them. So their view in general is very small. And that becomes problematic when they're in a society to where our view of Asatru is very big. We have members in 14 different countries, all across the United States. We have this big, amazing, beautiful future that we're trying to build. It is a big challenge to get people that have spent a lot of their life incarcerated to see those kind of possibilities, to see the world being bigger than their gang. And it sounds, condescending or whatever coming from our perspective. Realistically, their gang is the thing that kept them alive, that kept them safe, that sustained their existence while they were incarcerated. I've and this is the thing, a lot of people are in there for good reason and made really bad life choices and should be in there. A lot of them, some of them, maybe that's not the case. But either way, while you and I were out in the world developing social skills amongst girls, with jobs, with a variety of people at different points in their life and different life experiences, a lot of those guys spent their very formative years in a very, very specific environment and don't have those same points of commonality and don't have those same experiences socializing and interacting in the world. That's neither, a feeling sorry for or not. It's just a truth that we have to understand is true in how we help those people to approach the next chapter of their life. But yeah, we've had people that their view of Asatru is a stage much earlier in our development in the modern sense, to where a lot of us have grown past a stage that's very limited to a kind of silly caricature of the Viking Age in a way that's not particularly healthy. So the challenge to keep the good things that were learned from wisdom and shared experience while one was incarcerated and be able to marry those to the experiences shared with you from people who haven't come from that background and have come from a much more socialized and integrated background, being able to merge the two and find a path of wisdom forward is a challenge for a lot of people. And it's one that, quite honestly, most people fail. But it's one that myself and the other Gothar would really like to help people succeed at. And we try to. And there's a number of people that have been able to find, very meaningful success in the rest of their life from the Asatru that they first discovered when they were incarcerated. Svan, what has your experience been that way?
I think the recalibration after a life inside has a tendency to follow what I have just observed as two paths. There's the go hard and the get by. There are those that come into the faith and they go hard and they learn it, and it's very strong and it's very powerful, and there's a lot of knowledge because of the time spent reading books and having the ability to kind of not be distracted by a lot of things. Creates very strong minds in a lot of the men and women, but I'd be amiss to say women. Let's just focus on the truth. Seems to be more of the men that find Asatru inside. They are built with a ferociousness of wanting to understand lore and picking it apart. but they also come out and they go hard in outside. They believe big, and again, it can sometimes come off too as a caricatureness of like a Viking faith, and that does have a tendency to be that draw of generations on the inside. I have witnessed some folks who go into the get by. They believe, but they want to not be noticed. They don't want to ruffle feathers. They don't want to get involved, and they want to just kind of do their own thing. They don't really even teach it to their kids unless the kids are, expressing some sort of interest, and they really don't want to kind of connect to the greater community as a whole because they fear that it just kind of threatens. And I can understand that. I mean, I'm not necessarily even kind of waving my finger at it because, again, a lot of folks don't want to go back in, and they get a lot of things in their head as to what might do that or cause that or what have you. I think that there needs to be that kind of recalibration and temperament towards being in a community, understanding what it means to be in a community, that you don't have to go hard all the time, or that you don't have to just not get noticed. You can be a part of and build forward and look at the horizon with hope, teaching your children and being part of and around people who weren't inside and have done things and are doing things, and that you are now with them and a part of them, and that's where you need to go in order to, again, attain that betterment for our people. And so
I think that's a really good thing that you point out. The thing that I've noticed that seems to be a determining factor in success or failure, there are people who are ex-cons, and there's people who have done time in prison in the past. And I say that, I mean, obviously those two things mean the same thing, but the subtle distinction is there are people who take on the mantle of being an ex-con, and that is their identity. That's all their points of reference. That's what they look to. That's how they see themselves. So it's how they project to others. Every story goes back to something that happened inside or some prison thing. Everything they relate to goes back to that. Or there's people that have done time, and you may not know unless you know that person well and you've had that conversation, because they don't define themselves by their incarceration. They define themselves, whatever they want to do with their lives or the way that they see themselves in their future, instead of that moment in their past that, is, and understandably so, such a big part of how they see the world. The other thing is courage, and it gets displayed really differently. One thing that I've learned in my time at Asatru is we all struggle with courage. And it can look really different when that courage comes from, a nerdy incel guy that has lived a lot of time in the house and hasn't had a lot of experience in the world. Or when that same courage situation comes from a guy who's been locked up through most of his formative years. There's a similar struggle that they have, and it displays really different when they interact with the community. Sometimes some of the most scared people that I've seen have been the ones that would outwardly, most of us would think they were the most, hard ex-con dudes that have seen all this stuff that are super hard. They know that there's a difference in their experience between that and the rest of us. They know that they're the outsider coming into a situation they're unfamiliar with. And very often they're really scared of that interaction. They're not used to interacting with families and with older women, with women who are their contemporaries, with kids, with things. And it's daunting and scary. It's scary in the same way it is with incel kids who spend time at home. It just displays really different and it looks different. But it's something that, we all struggle to get past and that we can help each other to get past. But yeah, certainly we've seen that. And it's one of the reasons that prison ministry has been important to me, and I have done a little bit of it, and we look for ways to do more of it in a meaningful way. Is we would like to provide a pathway for folks that want to build a better life once they get out, to have people here to help with that pathway, to help build that, to help draw strength from, and a community for them to be a part of if they're committed to building something better. And we're in that process, and it's slow going, but we've made more progress lately, I feel, than we've ever had before. Our next question, and this one's going to be primarily for you, Svan. Gentlemen, enjoying the stream. What's the source for Nisa/Tomta information? Can we set the record straight and get some facts? P.S. McNallen statues are glorious, in all caps, and they absolutely are. I'm glad you appreciate that. They're way better than I could have even imagined. I am blown away by how well they turned out. So that's awesome. They truly deserve the honor. Svan, what is our source information for the Nisa/Tomta? And set the record straight. Lay down some facts for folks.
Okay. Let's just talk about the usage of the word in relation to beings of the home and the land. So the idea of a land vetir, or land white, a spirit of the land. And this, kind of got a lot of popularity in the romanticization of Nordic culture in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And a lot of cumulative folklore kind of became in print. And that's where a lot of this kind of the knowledge or the imagery really came into being. And this happened a lot all over Europe. The idea of say, for instance, the Christmas Carol and the ghosts of Christmas, and the first one having like a complete, almost identical overlay to Father Christmas amongst the English and their celebration of the Yuletide character that is disseminating festivities or gifts or what have you. Whereas the usage of the word, like say Nisi or Tomta, could also apply to just a spirit of the house or the land, not necessarily in Yule only. And so the way that I kind of viewed it is, if you're looking at Denmark and the islands, that's where the use of the word Nisi kind of comes about. And because they kind of directly connect with Norway, the use of Nisi would be more of like a Western usage. And then an Eastern Nordic usage, and I'm talking about Sverige, Sweden, Svidjod, and Finland, use the word Tomta or Tomtu as a kind of meaning. And it could have kind of the same connotations with the English word like brownie or a bogey, or a kind of a folklore essence of like a goblin or a I know that a lot of people, I actually in a previous VNS talked about the word of the use of the name gnome actually coming from France, and it's an alchemical term for a kind of spirit of the material. But the best way to clarify it is the Nisi is Western Nordic and the Tomta is Eastern Nordic, and they're both kind of names for spirits of the land. And they often, by the 18th century or late 1800s and early 1900s, they took on an image of what we would consider like a gnome in our culture, kind of an older little man with a red hat. And again, there's a lot to do with the red hat and the idea of, power of the mind. I know that Edward Thorson had in his earlier books proposed the idea that the color red upon the head is a sign of advanced, perhaps, knowledge or lore, and that the usage of the color red in relation to power and might. I don't know if that has tangible connections, or perhaps there's things being connected. But you know, the usage of those words, like in Iceland, have almost completely gone away, and the predominance of Hudurfolk, the hidden people, are oftentimes more utilized than even the word landvitir or landwhite. But it all boils down to kind of spirits of the land, and that also causes more confusion when we use the word alv or alvar or elf. And you know, Anglo-Saxons had it in the name of like Alfred, to be counseled by the elves, and so on. It causes even more confusion as being a being connected to the land that's not quite a human and not quite a god. And so that is where I think the Yule character lives and exists, is in that middle realm, and oftentimes is pointed towards an intent, whether that intent is treating the land well, or treating your livestock well, treating your home well, or respecting certain things, or really, like in the Anglosphere, it was about the spirit of giving, if you will. So treating each other well. So there's always kind of this connection between these spirits as being connected towards the wellness or the respectability of either an ideal or a location, or the land around a specific location. And that's like the really broad definition of those. But west, east, not even really used in Iceland, and then of course, you know, central and western, like in the Anglo-spheres, you know, kind of gave way to different folklore names, like bogey, or in German, that, you know, they called them kobold, the kind of spirits that lived in the land. And Nacht, you know, Tommy Knocker is another one that people might be familiar with in relation to like Appalachian folklore, and the idea of the kobolds knocking in the walls of mines and caves and things of that nature. So I hope that best explains it. Is a west and east.
All right. Well, that's going to bring our discussion for tonight to a close. Svan has agreed to join us again next week, as we are going to do both a reading and an analysis of the Eddic poem, the Völuspá. And I'm looking forward to that. I know we've had requests for that, and we're going to work through some of that material. And Svan is the perfect guy to have on to do that with me.
One of my favorites.
Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. I am happy to share everything that we've shared this evening, and I am looking forward to an amazing 2024 with you guys. We've got spectacular things ahead, and the way that we get there is not taking anything for granted, not leaving anything on the table, and remembering that victory never sleeps. Hail the gods, hail the folk, hail the AFA.